Welcome to History in the Shadow. Please subscribe our channel. If you like our videos, let's start the Viking Saga. There was a man called Halfdan the Black, who lived and died long ago, when the folk of Norway were still ruled by many small kingdoms, and folks still follow the old customs, believing in Odin, Thor, Freya, and other old gods. Halfdan grew up in the small farming town of Os, in the kingdom of Fjordain. He was fathered by Gudrod the Toothy and mothered by an outlander woman called Asa. As a young man, Gudrod had killed a few other local young men, for no reason other than boredom. As punishment for these wrongs, the Fjordain Assembly had sentenced Gudrod to 3 years as an outlaw. Forced into exile, Gudrod rode east across the mountains. After 12 years in the east, when nobody in Os knew if he was still alive, and few even thought about him much anymore, Gudrod had returned home with a surprising woman. Asa had very dark skin. Nobody in Os could remember ever seeing a person like her before. Asa's hair was completely black, tightly curled, and formed a soft ball around her head. She said that she was from Nubia, a place far to the south that nobody here had ever heard of. All of the gossip-loving folk in Os wanted to know their story. How had they met? Briefly, this is what happened. Asa's first husband had traveled with Asa from Nubia to Constantinople, where he was a diplomat to the Roman Empress. Gudrod had also lived in Constantinople then. He had learned to speak Greek and to pretend to worship Christ. These qualities, and his skill with spear and axe, had earned him a job in Constantinople as a bodyguard for the Empress Irene. Gudrod and Asa were often at the palace at the same time. Asa's odd-looking and darkly beautiful face, so different from Roman women, and from the pale and pointy-nosed girls he remembered from Os, appealed to him. He spied on her, learning that Asa was lonely and that her husband preferred boys. When Gudrod approached her, Asa agreed. They kept their love secret from everybody in Constantinople, until, long later, she became pregnant. Gudrod and Asa knew that it would be impossible to hide her unfaithfulness when her belly started to bulge, as Asa's first husband had not touched her in a long time. So Gudrod and Asa stole as many treasures from the Empress and from Asa's first husband as they could quickly get their hands on, fleeing Constantinople on horseback by night to the west. Gudrod had spent the early years of his exile in Russia and was able to arrange a wedding in a Russian Christian church. The fugitives continued west on horseback, her belly growing bigger and bigger. After many adventures, including losing their horses and treasure to bandits in Lithuania, Gudrod guided his huge-bellied wife over Norway's eastern mountains and into the kingdom of Fjordain and to his hometown of Os. There was born the hero of this saga. Asa became very sick in the long, dark winter of Halfdan's second year. She coughed and coughed. When her coughing finally ended, she was placed in the communal grave near Os. Gudrod, able to bear his sadness only with strong mead, drank and drank. When his drinking finally ended, he was held in chains for manslaughter and could not remember why he had axed 2 of his friends to shreds during a drinking fest in a mountainside shepherd's hut. As Gudrod was too poor to afford to pay compensation to the families of the victims, the Fjordain Assembly outlawed him again, this time for 7 years. Before his second exile, Gudrod placed his son in the foster care of Gudrod's sister and brother-in-law. Gudrod rode again to the east, across the mountains, never to return. He plays no more part in this saga. Nobody knows what happened to him. Halfdan was a difficult child to raise. He spoke little, and his few words were usually rude. He delighted in disobeying rules and fighting. His odd looks always attracted attention. Nobody in Fjordain had ever seen folk with Asa's and Halfdan's curly hair and skin much darker than theirs. In Os, visiting Swedes were rare, Danes and Finns were seen as wildly exotic, and only a few had heard of King Charlemagne. Often, folk would think that Halfdan had been covered with paint as a prank. More than once, when Halfdan was a young child, an adult grabbed him to rub snow or water on Halfdan's skin, trying to wipe off the brown paint. He was soon nicknamed Halfdan the Black, for the obvious reason, and also because the word black in Old Norse also meant wicked. Folk in Os said, he is going to grow up to be a blood-stained criminal like his father. But as Halfdan grew into a young man, his uncle Harold taught him to use his anger and violence for good ends. Halfdan grew a passion for listening to and composing spontaneous poetry. He would often laze away long winter nights by the fire, making up poems in his head. Even when very young, he would use that oldest of arts to express the feelings swirling inside his orphaned heart. When Halfdan chanted one of his rhyming and alliterating poems to a family member or one of his few friends, Halfdan's heart would sometimes empty of its fury and pain for a while. Uncle Harold told him to forget about becoming a farmer or shepherd or fisherman. Halfdan was told to try to become a professional fighter for the king of Fjordan, so that instead of pointlessly killing folk around here and being exiled for it like your father, you can kill folk for the government and be a famous hero. Halfdan the Black stepped out of King Lambie's hall. It was night. He had to piss. On the flat stone path in front of him, a few guard dogs were lying together. One dog was now sniffing at the early fall wind. The dogs knew Halfdan's smell and ignored him. Halfdan turned and walked toward a row of outhouses on the east side of the big building. The hall was a hulking rectangle of oak boards nailed to thick oak beams holding up a high roof. The hall was the biggest building in the town of Ede, which was the biggest town in the kingdom of Fjordan. It stood aloof from Ede's other buildings. Its sloping roof was covered with tall clumps of grass and dying, droopy summer flowers. It was surrounded by rich soil farmed by King Lambie. Halfdan was now 27 years old and had lived in the hall as one of the king's fighters for 11 years. His face and body were covered with scars. His black hair hung in tangled curls from the top of his head. It was cut short, almost to the skin on the back and sides of his head. In his hair and thick beard, there were a few thin strands of gray. He had one chipped front tooth, as was then customary in Norway on festive or formal occasions, for both men and women. Halfdan had smeared blue paint around both of his eyes. A T-shaped Tor idol of clay hung from a string around his muscle-thick neck. He wore a long-sleeved gray linen shirt that hung almost to his knees, tied at his waist by a belt of reindeer leather. The belt buckle was made of silver, twisted into the shape of a bug-eyed, cat-like beast with hands that gripped itself. A sword dangled from the belt, its oiled iron blade hiding in a sheath of cloth-wrapped oak wood. The well-used weapon swung forward and back beside the wool cloth of his right pant leg as he walked. A bit drunk from a long night of feasting and boozing with visitors from the neighboring kingdoms of Son and Ford, Halfdan looked up at the brooding snow-topped mountain range overhead and at the clear sky filled with sharp silver stars and a honey-yellow moon. Halfdan stopped walking, staring up. He lifted a hand as if to reach up and pull down some of the glittering stars. "Beautiful," he whispered. Halfdan walked past a row of carved and painted masks of the gods hanging on the outside hall wall. The grimacing faces of Odin, Thor, Freyr, Baldur, Loki, and others, some of whose names are now forgotten. Halfdan went to the corner of the hall and turned left again and went fast towards a row of woven wicker huts downwind of the hall. To his right, and across a grassy space, was the high wooden wall that surrounded Ede. On the other side of the town wall was a ragged line of shadowy trees that stretched up the dark mountain face. Halfdan went in an outhouse. A smell of beery piss and puke rose from the hole in the ground by his cow leather shoes. He yawned and aimed himself and soon felt better. As he was walking back towards the hall's front door, Halfdan again noticed the guard dogs on the path of flat stones that led towards the rest of the town. The dogs were now eating something. Halfdan was surprised. Before his piss, the dogs had been resting on the ground, and one had been sniffing the night wind. Where had the food come from? Halfdan, suspicious, stopped walking. He was staring at the dogs and about to go over to them to see what they were eating when something hit him in the lower part of his belly. It hit him hard and punched his breath out. Halfdan gasped and looked down. A wood arrow shaft with gray guide feathers was now sticking straight out of his belly. He gasped, tore. His legs went weak, and he fell backwards. He landed on his back on the cold, lumpy ground. Arrow shot in the gut. He knew he was dying. A bad way to end. It would be painful and slow. Halfdan lay stunned on the bumpy, grassy ground, preparing himself to die for a reason he did not know, the pain of the arrow reaching deeper and deeper into his guts. He turned his head sideways to look at the shadowy outer wall of King Lambie's hall. This place had been the center of his life, ever since leaving the small, dull town of Os at 16. The first time Halfdan had seen the building from the outside, its size and solid construction had greatly impressed him. And the first day he had seen it from the inside, escorted there, when it was empty, by his nervous-looking uncle Harold, Halfdan's mouth had dropped open in amazement. Tua! Halfdan had never seen a place like it before. It had seemed to be a single large room, though he learned later that the king and his queens had a separate sleeping room at the back. The room was so big, Halfdan had known entire families in Os who had fed themselves on farmland smaller than this. Some parts of the wood walls were undecorated, with bronze shield hooks. Elsewhere, brightly colored wool tapestries hung on the walls, showing vivid scenes of men and gods feasting and in battle. Furs hung on the walls, too. The gray skins of wolves, the larger brown skins of reindeer and moose and boar pig, and the huge yellow-white pelts of the legendary northern bear. The bestial faces of these hunting trophies snarled at the high ceiling. Halfdan saw other faces, too. There were small shelves on the thick oak beams holding up the roof, and on each shelf was resting the dried head of a man. Some looked like they had sat there for a long time. Messy, brittle-looking hair and beards dangled from the wrinkled, shriveled gray skin of the lifeless and grimacing heads. Swollen blackish eyes bulged out of some heads. The eyelids of others squinted or were completely shut. The top of each head was gone, and Halfdan could see the unlit tips of candles sticking up from the inside of each skull. A single long fireplace stretched from one end of the hall to the other. 2 rows of long tables went along both sides of the fireplace. Dozens of chairs were stacked by the long inner walls. At the far end of the room was a raised platform, which held up a table running perpendicular to the rest, with tall, fancily painted chairs behind it. In front of this king table stood a bronze idol of a boar pig, the size of a real boar pig, that glittered faintly in the sunlight beaming in through small, high windows. Straw and wildflowers were strewn across the dirt floor, giving off a nice, fresh smell. Uncle Harold said, when Lambie is in town, there are lots of folk hanging around in the evening here. The king and his fighters, the queens and their serving girls, local nobles, clerks, poets, and too many slaves to count. Harold had known this because, long before this time, he had once enjoyed a victory feast here, as a reward from the previous king for brave military service in the Third Great Swedish War. When will King Lambie come back to Eid? Halfdan asked. Harold said, whenever he finishes visiting his other properties around the kingdom. He owns more farms than anybody else, all along the fjord, and he likes to check each of them regularly, to get some dirt on his hands and keep his local managers honest. And the business of ruling also pulls him all over the kingdom, taking gifts of silver from some nobles to keep them from getting too rich, giving silver to other nobles to keep them from getting too ambitious, and hearing reports from his spies. When he has done all that, he will be back, and then he will accept me as one of his fighters. Harold said he should. It has been arranged. My bag of silver bits will get you in. But as I told you, getting accepted is not the hard part. Once you are in the hall, you have to prove yourself, or you'll be sent away. I will prove myself, no matter what I have to do. I know you will, Harold said. You're good with a weapon and even better with a poem, and that's what Lambie looks for in a man. Harold placed a hand on Halfdan's shoulder. You were born with strong luck. We are proud of the man you have become. Fate has something special planned for you. A few days later, the king's ship had returned to the Eid docks, and things had gone as Harold had predicted. A clerk had taken a bag of silver in front of witnesses. Harold and Halfdan had been told to report to the hall that night. When darkness finally came, and Halfdan, wearing new clothes and with fresh blue paint smeared around his eyes, went inside the hall for the second time, it was full of many different kinds of folk, as his uncle had described. Dozens of shields hung from the walls behind the tables. The candles sticking out of the man-heads on the shelves were burning, and they, along with the cooking fire in the middle of the room, filled the room with warm orange light. Many shaven-headed slaves were cleaning up after dinner or carrying beer buckets from table to table. The air smelled of male bodies and roasted meat. Men sat at tables in front of clay plates covered with bones and other dinner waste. These men held silver-decorated drinking horns and were talking and laughing until the two visitors from OS walked in. Then all went quiet. Everybody stared at Halfdan. Usually he did not mind being stared at. He was used to it. Most folk in OS had always viewed him as a freak. But now the staring eyes of this crowd of big-town folk made him more nervous. On the raised platform at the far end of the hall, a man was sitting on the highest chair in the middle of the table. Unlike at the other tables, a few finely dressed women were sitting up here. When a man in the middle of this table stood, Halfdan knew that this had to be King Lambie. The man was tall and thick-shouldered and 57 years old. Halfdan stopped and stared. "Come," Harold said. "This is not a time to be timid." As he walked with his uncle deeper into the hall, between the long tables towards the far end, Halfdan saw more of the man whom many poets called the strongest and the wisest of all Norse kings. Purple paint circled each of King Lambie's eyes. His beard and hair were thick and yellow, with some gray twisting through his long, braided beard. The king wore a full-length gown of shiny red silk, a magic kind of imported cloth that only a king or the richest of nobles could afford. King Lambie's belt, glittering with bits of honey-yellow amber, held a sword that was almost as long as his leg. The sword handle was of plain, well-used leather. It had obviously been chosen less for display than for use. King Lambie then spoke in a booming, deep voice, saying, "Is this the boy who wants to fight for me?" Harold said, "Yes, my lord. This is my nephew, Halfdan, son of Godrod, and he is the best young fighter in the town of OS. He will serve you well." King Lambie said, "Why is your nephew's face so black?" Harold said, "His mother was an outlander, and passed on her looks to him. Can it even speak Norse?" "He can, my lord. In fact, he is an excellent poet." King Lambie leaned forward and placed both of his fists on the tabletop and said to Halfdan, "Then tell me a poem, troll-faced boy. Make one up about why I should hire you." Harold glanced at Halfdan, taking a step backwards. After a long pause, Halfdan said, "My lord is famous for feeding crows with unlucky foes. Blood-steaming battlefields gave birth to your worthy rule. All have heard of your riches, how you spread it around your fighters. Wear fancy clothes with such fine treats to eat." Halfdan gestured with one hand towards the feasting table surrounding him, and there was some laughter from the men sitting in the chairs. More confident, Halfdan glared at King Lambie and shouted, "Since youth I yearned to serve you and join your warship's crew. I knew that I needed to serve you, or serve nothing." After a pause, Halfdan said lamely, "The end." There was some clapping and a few hoots. The men at the tables had all heard better poems, but also many much worse. Most were impressed to hear it from someone so young and so odd-looking. King Lambie was still standing behind his table on the platform. He seemed to be nodding slightly in approval. Finally, he said, "If you can fight as well as you rhyme and alliterate, you may be worthy. Come back tomorrow at noon, alone." Halfdan walked out of the hall with a big grin across his face. The next day, again wearing newly bought clothes and fresh blue paint smeared around his eyes, Halfdan showed up at the hall for the hall-joining ritual. The king and some others waited for him outside the hall, standing in a group on a field. They all wore fancy clothes and face paint too. King Lambie was wearing a long white linen gown. A gray stallion was tied to a stake in the ground. King Lambie said, "Halfdan, son of Godrod, kneel in front of the horse." When Halfdan had done so, King Lambie said, "Do you choose to join my bodyguard, knowing that you can never leave my service, except by your death or by my command?" "I do," Halfdan said. He was distracted for a moment by the buzzing sound of a hornet flying past his head. Then he forced himself to concentrate on what the king was saying. "Do you vow to protect me from all foes, both inside and outside Fjordain?" "Yes." "If I am struck down, do you vow to take revenge on my killer, even if he is your family?" "Edo." "And will you accept the greatest suffering and the greatest shame known to man or gods, if you should ever break your vows made here today?" "Edo." King Lambie said, "Then let us see if the gods approve." A man in priest's clothing gave King Lambie a wide, bronze-bladed knife. King Lambie held the horse's head with one hand and, with the other, cut its throat. As Halfdan knelt in front of the startled beast, the hurt sprayed and drenched him in hot, sticky blood. It went onto his eyes and blinded him. He had to hold his breath to keep the reeking gore out of his nose. A low, bubbling groan from the dying horse. It reared up to its back legs. It raised its big front hooves and started kicking wildly over the blood-soaked head of the unmoving young man kneeling on red-drenched grass. Halfdan did not flinch. He knew that his good luck would not let him be struck by any of the random hoof swipes, and he was right. When the horse stopped kicking and fell down dead, the group of men cheered. "The gods approve," shouted the priest who had brought the knife. "Stand up, Halfdan the Black," King Lambie said. "Get yourself cleaned up. Your new life starts now." Halfdan finally allowed himself to move. He stood. A slave handed him a bucket of water, then put a big wood box at his feet. Halfdan took off all his bloody clothes and washed his body clean with a cloth dipped in the bucket. When the last of the horse blood was off him, Halfdan opened the lid of the box. He saw with joy that it was full of fancy-looking new clothes. Fine wool pants and thick wool socks and a puffy-sleeved white shirt made of the same linen as the gown King Lambie now wore. In the box, there was also a pair of shiny cow-leather shoes and a pig-leather belt. On one end of the belt was a silver belt buckle shaped, as described earlier, like an unnatural-looking beast with gripping hands. "My first gift to you," King Lambie had said. That night in the hall, Halfdan drank horn after horn of mead and beer, feasted on horse steak, and listened awestruck to King Lambie singing sad old songs and playing a silver harp. 11 years later, lying on his back on the cold ground in the shadow of King Lambie's hall, not far from where he had undergone the joining ritual, Halfdan realized that he was not dying from the arrow after all. He was getting his breath back, and the pain in his gut was getting less strong. Arrow shots to the belly were known to be extremely painful. Not like this. Such hurts were usually accompanied by the smell of shit leaking from a torn open large intestine. There was no shit smell now. Then what had happened? Halfdan moved a hand to the arrow shaft and touched it. No jolt of pain. He touched the thin piece of ash wood with his hand and tried to move it. It was stuck solidly into something, but not him. He raised his head to look. The belt buckle. The arrow had stuck into the soft silver of his belt buckle. The long-ago gift from King Lambie. It had saved his life. The barbed iron tip of the arrow had stuck into one of the paws of the decorative beast shape. He yanked the arrow tip out of the belt buckle and glanced at it. Just a normal-looking arrow, the sort that could be used for either hunting or war. He tossed it aside. His skin under the belt buckle felt sore, but unbroken. Halfdan rolled over and onto his hands and knees, still breathing heavily. He looked around the darkness. Who had shot him? He could not see anybody. The dogs were still eating whatever they had found. What was going on? He had to go inside to warn King Lambie. He pushed himself to his feet, and, unsteady from both the arrow impact and the horns of booze drunk earlier, drew out his sword. His heart was pounding with near panic. Looking all around for the unfriendly archer, he staggered quickly to the front of the hall. He had to warn them. With his free hand, he yanked at the handle of the heavy oak door. It should have easily swung open on its greased iron hinges. It had always done so before. But now the door would not open. It was somehow jammed shut. He heaved back with all his strength, tugging at the handle. The wall masks of the gods glared blankly past him. Halfdan was very confused. Had someone inside barred the door shut? Halfdan raised his sword and banged its handle hard onto the thick oak wood door planks. He yelled, "Open! Open the door! Someone out here just tried to kill me. Help!" He stopped banging and yelling for a moment to listen through the door. Had he woken up anybody? Was that a scraping sound coming through the wood, or just his imagination? Halfdan raised his sword handle again and was about to bang on the door again when he heard a sound of a bowstring behind him. Halfdan flinched, just as an arrow stabbed into the door, a finger's length away from his head. He turned around. A crowd of armed men wearing war helmets, 50 or 60 at least, were running towards him in a battle line. Some were being dragged forward by chains attached to big, excited-looking war dogs. These arriving dogs started barking, which made the hall guard dogs start barking back. The night filled with barking and growling as the two groups of dogs ran madly at each other. "Tor's balls!" Halfdan shouted. Most of the men running towards Halfdan were carrying shields in one hand and a spear or an axe or a sword in the other hand. A few of them were archers. A bowstring twanged from their direction, and another gray-feathered arrow bit into the door between his legs, a small distance under Halfdan's crotch. Helpless fear pounded in his chest and neck. Hard to breathe. He had been in many battles, but this was different. He was alone, without a leader giving commands, his thinking slowed by all the beer he had guzzled inside the hall. Halfdan was not at all ready for this. An army was running at him from the front. The door to the hall behind him would not open. There was nothing he could do for those inside. He would die if he stayed here. He heard the sound of an archer shooting at him again and ducked. Again the arrow missed. Without a thought, forgetting to check the back door to the hall, Halfdan turned and ran. Back towards the outhouses. Iron-tipped arrows spat, hissing over his shoulders. He raced past a row of smelly wicker huts and across King Lambie's farm field, which was covered with barley stubble from the recent harvest, and towards the town wall. It was made of sharpened pine logs, held upright and together by iron nails and thick pine wood crossbeams. He tossed his sword over it and leaped high to grab the top of the fence and threw a foot on a crossbeam and hurled himself over. He landed on his feet on the ground on the other side, rolling his body onto the ground at the moment of impact, then bouncing quickly up from the direction of the hall. He heard, mixed with the noises of dogs fighting dogs, the indistinct yelling of men. He could not make out any of their words, but they did not sound friendly. Who were they? He was standing near an oak tree with thick, low branches. He grabbed a branch and pulled himself high enough up to see over the top of the town wall. King Lambie's hall was surrounded by dozens of helmet-wearing strangers and their snarling war dogs. And a group of 5 or 6 dogs was running towards the part of the fence Halfdan had climbed over, followed by a larger number of the mysterious fighters. One of them pointed at where Halfdan hung from the tree branch. Halfdan's head and the top of his body could be seen from inside the fence. Halfdan heard the man shout, "Look! He's hiding up that tree. Lift the dogs over the fence, and they'll trap him up there." Halfdan dropped back to the ground, now completely panic-filled, and ran away from the fence towards the line of trees at the base of the mountain range in front of him. Despite the light of stars and moon, it was too dark to see the ground well, and he often stumbled. He ran towards some raspberry bushes, tried to jump over them, but one of his feet tripped into a thick branch loop, and he flung forwards and down into the mass of spiky berry branches. His falling face slid along a thorn-covered branch, ripping skin from his beard-covered cheek and one of his ears. He dropped his sword and peeled the gripping thorns off his face. Blood and raspberry juice dripped onto his white linen shirt. One of his shoes had fallen off. Behind him, he heard the deep baying of dogs. They sounded like they were on this side of the wall. He had to get away from their fast, heavy bodies and terrible teeth. He stumbled away in the light of moon and stars. He ran past some big chunks of granite stone that had, ages ago, rolled down from the mountain. He ran around the boulders and scattered bushes and trees and came to a mud bank stream. As he jumped over the thin flow of water and used both hands to scramble up the chilly, slippery mud of the other side, Halfdan realized something. He had forgotten his sword and one shoe in the raspberry bushes. Halfdan hissed, "Fool!" and slapped his forehead. How could he fight off dogs or armed fighters with empty hands? He couldn't. If they caught him, they would easily kill him. "Fool!" he said again. The dogs were still barking somewhere in the darkness behind him and seemed to be getting louder. The ground was now sloping upwards. This was the lowest part of the mountain that brooded over Ede. The birch and pine and occasional oak trees grew closer together here, and the chunks of rock strewn between the tree trunks were covered with green moss. Inside the forest, he stopped to listen behind him, heard the barking dogs getting closer. He looked at his feet. His right one was covered by an untied cow-leather shoe. His left foot was bare. He bent to tie the strings on his right shoe with trembling fingers. Each clumsy knot he tried to make fell apart. Tor's balls. Forget it. He kicked off the single shoe and ran barefoot into the forest. He followed a rock-strewn trail that twisted up mountain through the rocks and trees and clumps of low bushes. The dark around him and the confusion inside made it hard to move fast up the mountain base. His bare feet slipped in the cold, gravelly mud of the trail and scraped on small rocks. He felt an old, familiar pain in one knee. Years ago, he had twisted it while jumping off a warship to raid a town with King Lambie. It throbbed more and more as he ran. Breathing hard, he passed under the thick, moss-covered branches of a fallen tree and tripped over some tangled roots twisting out of the ground. He ran through piles of rocks from long-ago avalanches. Sometimes he saw patches of clear, starry sky overhead through the dim branches overhead. His face still stung and bled from the thorns of that raspberry bush. Once he blundered off the trail and felt his feet and ankles burning from the acid licks of stinging nettles. A short while after, he turned a twist in the trail, and his bare foot slipped in some mud. His foot slid off the trail and into a knee-high anthill of dry pine needles. A smell of vinegar rose from the broken open mound, and the bugs swarmed onto him and bit at his skin until he rubbed them off with a hand. Now he did not hear the dogs barking anymore. The forest trail zigzagged in the shape of a lightning bolt. He followed it up and up. His legs and back muscles ached from the exertion. Blood pounded in his neck and head. His knee hurt worse with every frantic step. He had to rest. He stopped on top of a rock ledge and put his hands for support onto the rough trunk of a pine tree. There he rested, in a patch of moonlight and starlight, breathing harshly, staring at the pebbles and little plants around his feet. Who was attacking the hall? What was happening to his king and all his friends? No sound of barking now, but the dogs must still be after him, running as a pack through the forest, their open mouths full of floppy red tongues and wet white fangs. As he started going again, his foot painfully kicked a loose, fist-sized rock. It bounced up to hit a skull-sized rock with a loud, sharp bang. Behind and below him, the dogs heard the noise and started barking again. They sounded closer. He needed some kind of weapon. As Halfdan scrambled up the dark and slippery mountainside, he picked up a broken birch branch the length of his arm. Then he bent to snatch up a fist-sized rock. Again, Halfdan slipped on the trail mud. He fell onto a man-sized pine tree, one that would be perfect for decorating a Yule feast. Would he ever enjoy a Yule feast again? He pushed himself away from the half-broken tree, hands now covered with sticky pine sap and bits of bark and dry needles. The mountain trail led up to a small waterfall pouring from a rock crack overhead into a small pool, which was drained by a rocky stream running downhill. The dark waterfall was sided by steep granite cliffs. In the dim light, Halfdan could barely see the hand paintings that covered these cliffs. He had been to this place a few times before, for religious rituals with all the folk of Eid, and remembered how impressive the cliffs had looked in daylight. The rocks were covered with big, brightly colored paintings of wild beasts, warships, bolts of lightning, and dozens of man figures with huge, erect penises. Near the cliff top, over all the other pictures, was the largest of the painted pictures, depicting the yellow flame sun. The trail got steeper as it went past the tinkling waterfall and twisted around giant boulders towards a steep, jagged rock cliff face. The trail went up a natural ramp along the side of the cliff. As Halfdan limped up this narrow path, with a steep drop to his right, he heard the sounds of snarling close behind him. Halfdan turned and saw two big, gray-furred war dogs burst out of the forest shadows after him. They loped up past the waterfall and onto the narrow cliff path and up after him. There was no point in running anymore. Halfdan threw the fist-sized rock at the first dog. It hit the dog's chest and bounced away. The beast seemed not to notice and jumped at Halfdan, its open mouth drooling. Halfdan swung the heavy birch branch at its open mouth full of spiky yellow teeth. The club knocked the dog sideways off the path. It fell, barking, down to the chunks of rocks below. The other dog leapt at him. Halfdan swung the stick at it and missed. The dog bit on a Halfdan's sore knee, clamped its teeth tight, shaking its strong neck to rip away a piece of Halfdan's flesh. Halfdan stumbled back, trying to get a hard strike with the birch branch on the dog's thick, squirming back. The war dog tugged hard at his knee, growling deep in its throat. No, Althangruanith. He toppled backwards. As he fell, the dog let go of his knee and lunged forward towards the soft brown skin of Halfdan's exposed throat. Just before the teeth reached their target, Halfdan punched his right fist into the side of the dog's thick neck, while twisting frantically to one side. Together, man and dog rolled off the trail and fell down the cliff. As he fell, Halfdan pulled the snapping, kicking beast to his body and twisted in the air so that the dog was below him. The dog landed on the hard rocks, and Halfdan landed on the soft dog. The impact knocked almost all the air out of Halfdan's body. For a moment his eyes saw only swirling blackness, and he felt his mind drifting away towards something like sleep. He lay on the motionless dog, gasping for breath, trying not to pass out completely. Finally, sight returned to his eyes, and he saw the dog's head resting right beside his own. It was dead. Halfdan slowly got to his feet. His body was full of pain. He was hurt in many body parts. His belly was still sore from the arrow hitting his belt buckle. His face had been scraped by a thorny raspberry branch. His shoeless feet were battered by trail rocks. The nasty-looking dog bite on his knee was pouring out blood. His legs and chest were torn by the dog's claws, and his ribs were broken, or at least very bruised, from falling off the cliff onto the dog. It desperately needed a rest. A man's deep voice nearby in the forest yelled, "This way! He's over here!" Halfdan scowled, then ran back towards the cliff and staggered unsteadily back up the narrow path. There was a flat area at the top, a little ledge strewn with gravel and small rocks. He found 3 bigger rocks, each the size of a man's skull. He picked up each of these, placed them near the edge of the ledge, and crouched. Only the top of his head could be seen from below as he peeked down and waited. Soon, 5 armed strangers walked fast out of the forest shadows and along the trail. They strode in single file past the sacred waterfall. In the dim light, Halfdan could see that the men were all big and yellow-bearded. 4 of them carried spears and shields. These men wore helmets and leather body armor. The tallest man walked in front, without a helmet or shield or body armor. He carried a long-handled and wide-bladed axe in both hands. He wore a black bear fur over his shoulders. He looked like a berserker, a rare kind of fighter with no fear, no mercy, and notorious strength. Halfdan's unknown foes walked past the waterfall and the cliff covered with religious art, to where the trail started to get narrower and steeper. One of the 4 regular fighters pointed ahead and said, "Look, the dogs." Hiding above, Halfdan watched the group move closer. "They're both dead," one regular fighter said. Another said, "Really? How? He must have killed them." Killed 2 dogs after losing his sword? Tor's thundering balls. "What kind of man are we after?" "Shut up," the berserker said. "Come on, do your job. He is near." They walked past the 2 dead dogs, 4 of the men looking reluctant, and started going single file up the narrow cliffside path. When they were halfway to the top, Halfdan stood up, and with both hands he lifted one of the skull-sized rocks up over his head. The foes were right under him. They heard him move and looked up. 4 of them flinched when they saw Halfdan's dark-skinned face, saw his shredded and blood-soaked clothes, saw him hurling a big piece of mountain rock down at them, and they heard him grunt. The thrown rock hit the helmetless head of the berserker in front. Apparently unhurt, the berserker looked up at Halfdan with a sneer of contempt. After bouncing from the berserker's head, the rock fell down to land near the dead dogs with a sharp click sound. The berserker did not move. Then his eyes rolled up in his head, and the axe dropped from his suddenly limp hands. The berserker collapsed. He sprawled awkwardly on the rock path, motionless except for one oddly twitching leg. The 4 other fighters saw Halfdan quickly bend down, then stand again, raising another big stone overhead. "A troll!" wailed one of the remaining foes. Halfdan grunted with the effort of throwing it down at the fighter standing farthest up the trail. It missed, flying over all of their helmets and bouncing with a loud bang, off a boulder below them, then flying towards a sacred waterfall and splashing into its pool of water. Halfdan bent to pick up his last rock. After that, he would have nothing left to throw down at them but his exhausted and blood-smeared body. But the 4 fighters had seen enough. Cowering under their round shields, they started backing away, shuffling down the cliffside path and scrambling across the rock-strewn bottom. They all ran away, past the dim waterfall and fast into the shadowy line of trees. They were gone. Halfdan dropped the big rock to one side. He stepped a bit back from the edge of the cliff. Slowly, he sat down. He could not run anymore. He could barely think or remember why he was there. So he lay on his back on the hard, bare rock of the high ledge, his confused mind spinning and swirling, pain stabbing all over his body until he passed out. Translator's note: chapters marked with an asterisk are not part of the original Old Norse manuscript of Viking Saga. These extraneous chapters consist mainly of correspondence between Abbess Tedda, the head of England's Lindisfarne nunnery, destroyed by Vikings on June 8, 793, and Bishop Alcuin, an English missionary in Germany, and Tedda's spiritual advisor. June 1st, year of our Lord 792, to the wise virgin and best-loved lady, the Abbess Tedda, and all of the other sisters in Christ on the blessed island of Lindisfarne. Alcuin, a most unworthy servant of God, the bishop and legate of the Roman Church to Germany, sends you his heartfelt greetings in Christ. I am ever mindful of your most sweet friendship, with which you most kindly received me long ago with all joy. I have never forgotten those summer days in York, when you and I and your brother worked side by side on holy projects there. I always remember the wisdom of your mind, the gentle music of your endless prayers, and your obvious purity. Greatly as I then was glad in your presence, so greatly do I now suffer in your absence. I beg my gracious lady not to be offended by my lateness in sending a personal letter to you, in reply to your last learned letter, which I received long ago. This delay was owing to my great preoccupation with the restoration of the churches burned by the pagan Germans still infesting our parishes and cloisters. Despite our educational efforts and the military support of King Charlemagne, the misguided pagans of Germany have recently pillaged and burned more than 30 churches. It was this disaster, not forgetfulness or change of feelings, which delayed my writing to you sooner. Despite the local unrest, God has recently also brought good fortune to our holy mission. The pagan German petty king Rothbard, who once dared to hold myself as a captive when I tried to bring holy truth to his blighted province, is dead. I am told that while this dissolute man-fiend sat feasting amidst his filthy and illiterate nobles, the same evil spirit which had seduced him into defying the law of God suddenly struck him with madness, so that still in his sins, without repentance or confession, raving mad, gibbering with demons, and cursing the priests of God, he fell forward into his half-eaten meal and departed from life to the torments of hell, where Rothbard will witness in horror, as described in Scripture, the very bowels of the earth, millions of fiery pits vomiting terrible flames, and, as the foul fires rise, the souls of wretched men clinging to the edges of the pits, wailing and howling and shrieking with pitiful cries, mourning their past deeds and present agonies, until they fall screaming into the pits, there to regret their errors forever. The German people are still extremely fickle and unfaithful. Uncountable numbers of Germans who chose baptism after the war have, now that most of the King Charlemagne's soldiers have been sent elsewhere, shamelessly returned to their idols and druids and sacrifices. What loss of souls for the Church, if we fail to reconvert them. I have been commanded by His Holiness and Supreme Patriarch, our beloved Pope Hadrian, to suppress all human sacrifices in this dark land. Incredibly, there are Germans who claim to be Christians, who took baptism and attend church services, who have renounced human sacrifice, but who see nothing wrong with selling slaves to pagan druids, knowing full well that these slaves are to be drowned by the evil druids in a dirty swamp to praise false gods. I confess that I still do not understand many of the German customs. Some Germans refrain from eating ordinary foods which God created for our meals. Others live on milk and honey alone, I hear. Such is the culinary depravity of the Germans, that I have also been commanded by His Holiness to suppress the eating of wild and tame horses in Germany. His Holiness, in one of his frequent letters to his most humble and undeserving of lowly servants, called horse-eating a filthy and abominable custom, and demanded I suppress it, as of course I am zealous to do. King Charlemagne, an avid equestrian who, alas, is more often seated on a saddle than a church pew, also supports the ban on eating horse meat. After so many long years living among these rude and savage Germans, I am sore at heart with longing for my native land of England and our familiar traditions. Sometimes I dream of English food, a pastry baked in the true English way, stuffed with parsnips and pork bits, the crust nicely browned, is to an Englishman living where nobody cooks properly a subject of longing and fantasy. Though I am but poorly equipped as a teacher, yet I try to be the most devoted of them all, as you yourself well know. Be mindful of my devotion and take pity on an ancient man worn out by troubles in this barbaric land. Support me by your prayers to God, and help me by supplying me with the sacred writings. May I be so bold as to beg of you to send me the copy of the Universal History Against the Pagans by Orosius, which Winbert, of revered memory, my former abbot and teacher, left to your library when he departed this life. A copy of the Universal History Against the Pagans, such as I need, cannot be procured in this book-poor country, because with my failing eyesight it is impossible for me to read small, abbreviated script. I asked for Winbert's copy, because I know that Winbert wrote each letter and each word clearly and separately. His copy will greatly help my teaching work here, as it proves by example and by logic that the world before Christ's coming was full of calamities and woe and tyranny, and that the supremacy of the Church has brought wealth and peace and justice to those who truly love him. Should God inspire you to do this for me, no greater comfort could be given me in my ancient age, nor could you earn any greater reward. Sister Tetta, I beg you, nay, I command you, to write to me soon, in rich detail, telling me of life at Lindisfarne. I have not been to that blessed island since your election as abbess, when you became Virgin Mother of Virgins, and am curious as to what has changed at your convent, and what remains as I remember. I am also curious to read news of our lovely but trouble-filled kingdom of Northumbria, and also of the other English kingdoms. Any news is welcome, especially regarding my hometown of York, a place I miss almost as painfully as I miss you. Meanwhile, I pray earnestly that you will remember, as I remember well, your ancient promise to constantly pray for me, so that the Lord, who is the Redeemer and Savior of us all, may rescue my soul from so many threatening dangers. Pray strenuously, therefore, to the merciful defender of our lives, the only refuge of the afflicted, the Lamb of God who has taken away the sins of the world, to keep me safe from harm with his sheltering right hand as I go among the dens of wolves, that, when my loins are girded as if for battle, the Father all-merciful may place a blazing torch of truth in my hand to enlighten the hearts of the pagans to the glory of Christ. And I pray also that you may be pleased to pray for those pagans put under my authority by the wisdom of his holiness, that the Savior of the world may see fit to rescue them from human sacrifices and the worship of vile idols, joining them to the daughters and sons of the only true faith, to the praise and glory of him, whose will it is that all men shall be saved and shall come to the truth. My dear sister, implore God with clear and incessant prayers, as I trust that you do now, and as you have done since we last saw each other, and will continue to do, unceasingly, that I, lover of Christ and teacher of most holy Scripture, may be delivered, in the words of the Apostle, from unreasonable and wicked men, who are so prevalent here. Please pray to the Lord God, who is the refuge of the weak and the hope of the wretched, to shield my eyes from the temptations of this passing, wicked world. Farewell in Christ. Halfdan turned to look at the view. Since waking this morning with a hangover and worse, he had walked up a mountain overlooking Ede. He was wearing the berserker's boots and carrying his heavy axe. From where Halfdan had climbed, there was a good view of the fjord and the land surrounding it. Ede could be seen, its two main streets going roughly north-south, 7 smaller streets going east-west, dozens of grassy roof homes and other buildings, the royal farm fields, all surrounded by the wood wall that Halfdan had scrambled over last night. Even from this distance, he could see that King Lambie's hall had been completely burned to the ground. There was a black scorched, rectangle-shaped smudge where the famous hall had once stood. Halfdan looked away from that painful sight and looked west at the brown and white ridges of mountains marching in rough lines to the horizon. The blue-green water of the fjord snaked between the mountains towards the endless ocean. He started walking again. Near the cold, windy top of the mountain was a patch of summer snow. His body ached from a dozen hurts, and he was getting tired of walking uphill. He scooped a few handfuls of the crunchy frost into his mouth to drink the melt. As he was doing so, he saw something from the side of his eye. A stone's throw away, a young woman was sitting on a rock with her face in her hands, her back to him, as her shoulders shook with sobbing. As he approached her, an older, frowning woman stepped out from behind a rock outcrop, holding a bow. She pulled the arrow back to beside her ear and aimed it at Halfdan. "Stop!" she shouted. Halfdan dropped the axe to the rocky ground and put his hands in the air, saying, "I mean you no harm." "Who are you?" "Halfdan, son of Godrod, of the town of Os. Folk call me Halfdan the Black. I am one of King Lambie's fighters." After a pause, Halfdan said, I used to be. Now I have no job. Why are you so dark?" Halfdan briefly explained his parentage. He did this almost every time he met someone new. The older woman said, "You said that Lambie is dead?" "Yes." The old woman's arrow was still drawn to beside her suspicious-looking face, pointed at Halfdan's chest. She said, "Who did it?" Halfdan said, "The kings of Son and Ford. Their men trapped King Lambie and all of my blood brothers inside the hall and burned the hall down. I was the only one to survive, because I ran away." Halfdan knew of the involvement of the kings of Son and Ford because when Halfdan had woken up this morning, the berserker lying on the cliffside path had been still alive. Paralyzed but alive and able to talk. After Halfdan had dragged him to the waterfall and held his head under a few times, the berserker from Son had spent his last moments of life answering Halfdan's questions. "Why did you run away?" asked the old woman. Was that a flash of contempt in her eyes? Did she think he was a coward? After running away from the burning of his king, what was he? Was he anything? The old woman said again, "Why did you run away?" Halfdan's face muscles tightened. He looked at the old woman with irritation and said, "Either shoot me or put that thing down." I said, "I mean you no harm." "How do I know?" "You don't. So shoot me." "I might." But after a few moments of silence, she lowered the arrow and relaxed the draw string. "I will trust you." Halfdan picked up the battle axe, saying, "Who are you?" The older woman was called Siv, and her daughter was called Exiled. The two of them lived together on a farm in the town of Starheim. Both were clever and proud, and sometimes too sharp-tongued. A rabbit fur hood covered most of Siv's sparse gray hair. She wore a blue dress decorated with green glass beads, under a light blue apron held in place by oval-shaped wax-polished wood brooches at her shoulders. Dangling from her belt was a small knife and one of the small wood boxes in which women carried personal objects. Exiled was a few years younger than Halfdan and beautiful in looks. She was dressed like her mother, but with more attention to fashion, and from her belt hung a bronze key, which showed she was married. Exiled was tall, with a strong jaw and bold eyes. Her gray-blue eyes matched her mother's. A gray headcloth was over her long and braided yellow hair. She also carried a bow and some hunting arrows. Siv explained that she and Exiled had been visiting friends in Eve for the past few days. Yesterday, Exiled and Siv had spent the day up on the mountainside, gathering magic plants. Siv was a healer, and Exiled training to become one, until late in the night, when they had returned to the home of their friends, to find it full of horror and tragedy. Their friends both lay on the floor, dead, both of them covered with gaping cuts and stab holes. Their serving girl's body was tied to a bed, half naked and grossly mutilated. Hearing violence from other houses, Siv and Exiled had fled back up the mountain. Exiled was sobbing again, while Siv finished telling Halfdan their story. They were in a hidden cleft of rock on the other side of the mountain, still near the peak, sitting around a small fire. Siv and Exiled were sharing a blanket around their shoulders against the chill. That was all they had for warmth. The air was chilly, so high up, especially in the shade. Ingvild said, "Why would the kings of Son and Ford have their fighters kill folk who weren't fighters and not involved in politics?" "I don't know," Halfdan said. SIV said, "What do you know? What did the berserker tell you before you drowned him?" "He told me that King Jarl of Son and King Gunvald of Ford had tried to get King Lambie to join them in a raid on some new land to the west that is supposed to be very rich. When King Lambie refused to join them, the other kings worried that when they were off raiding this new land, Son and Ford would be left without much defense, and King Lambie might be tempted to invade and take them over. I had not heard about this because King Lambie was not in the habit of talking about diplomacy with us regular fighters, but it makes sense. It was no secret that King Lambie lusted for a bigger kingdom. King Jarl and King Gunvald had another reason to want King Lambie out of the way. They wanted to use his ships for the raid. So, by bribing a few folk in Fjordain who loved silver more than their king, Jarl and Gunvald managed to get groups of their men to eat. They stayed in a hidden camp outside the walls, while a traitor inside, Eid, did their dirty work. When I happened to be outside to piss, the traitor went to the hall, giving the dogs food to keep them quiet, and jammed the hall doors shut, both front and back. I don't know how. Maybe magic. As he was leaving, he saw me and shot an arrow at me and left me for dead, gonna gate to let in the others. When I was running away, King Jarl's and King Gunvald's men surrounded the hall, to burn it with everybody trapped inside. That's all I know, Ingvild said. But why would they hurt innocent townfolk? Halfdan said, sometimes, when a raid goes well, the leader will reward his men by letting them go wild. The men are allowed to steal whatever they find, drink until their minds are gone, smash things for fun, kill civilian folk for fun, and do what they want with females. SIV looked coldly at Halfdan and said, "You are a fighter. At least, you used to be. When you did a good raid, did King Lambie reward you that way?" "Sometimes. I enjoyed the stealing and drinking, but I did not do much of the other stuff. When I was much younger, a few times I did the things that I saw my blood brothers doing, but believe me, it has not been for many years. Now I know it is wrong, so I will not hurt either of you in any way. I vow by Freya." SIV looked slightly relieved. She had been glancing nervously between Halfdan and Ingvild for some time, as the sky was getting darker and the air getting colder as night fell. Ingvild looked from Halfdan to SIV and said, "By Freya, what kind of healers are we? He is hurt." In all the excitement, I didn't even think about treating his hurts. "I will do it," SIV said. She opened the box on her belt and took out a small clay jar. There was a picture of a bee painted on the jar lid. "As long as you don't try to bleed me," Halfdan said. "I have bled enough. No more." "We don't use that method," Ingvild said. First, SIV cleaned his hurts with a cloth wet with melted snow. Then she smeared on a smelly orange paste from the jar. The goo tingled on his hurt flesh. "What is it?" Ingvild told him, "Magic herbs mixed with honey. July 28th, year of our Lord 792, to Alcuin of York, venerable servant of God, endowed with many spiritual gifts, evangelist to the Germans, most worthy priest of God. Teta, an unworthy wretch, a lowly housemaid for Christ, sends her most affectionate greetings. I have no words to express my thanks for the abundant affection you have shown to me in the letter brought by your messenger from beyond the sea. When I heard your reverence was well and prosperous, I confess I was glad in my heart. God has indeed rewarded your lifelong teaching efforts. First, the Lord inclined his holiness, our beloved Pope Hadrian, of the glorious see in Rome, to grant the desire of your heart by sending you on such a vital mission to Germany, with so many pagan souls at stake, so many souls starved for truth. Now, you write that he has laid low before you Rothbard, that once proud enemy of the Church. It saddens me to think of any soul, even a pagan one, sinking to the hell horrors your letter vividly described. But cruel Rothbard, surely, is due little pity from any Christian, considering his many outrages against us. I am concerned to read that your eyesight is worsening. Although loss of vision is a common companion to growing older, along with white hairs and lined skin, yet treatment of this malady is not impossible. The ancient physician Galen, in his treatise on fluids, advised frequent bloodletting from the neck artery to relieve eye strain. Yet perhaps religion is sufficient consolation for any physical malady. Have you ever considered that you are losing your sight for a greater purpose? I say that most merciful God has permitted you to be afflicted in this way, so that you may gaze with the eyes of the Spirit on those things which God loves and commands, while seeing less of the things God hates and forbids. After all, what are our bodily eyes but windows through which we observe sins and sinners, or worse still, observe and desire them, and so fall ourselves into sin? Having read with joy that you are interested in our insignificant labors here at Lindisfarne, I will inform you, as best as I am able, through this unpolished letter. I fear writing to you, a true scholar. Your compilations on grammar and on rhetoric are both well used here. I must rely on the grace of him, who puts truth in the mouths of the speechless, and who makes eloquent the babbling of children, to convey my most secret of worries to you, my most esteemed Alcuin. It is the usual custom for women who are in trouble and anxiety to seek the consolation and advice of those on whose wisdom and affection we can rely. And so it is with me. As I am the only daughter of my parents, and as my only natural brother has gone to his eternal reward, I regard you, dearest Alcuin, as my brother in spirit, for there is no man anywhere in whom I have such confidence as in you. Relying on your friendship and experience, I come to lay before you all my difficulties and vexations of mind, and I beg you to support me with your comfort and advice. My labor here seems like that of a guard dog that sees robbers breaking into and plundering his master's house, but because he has none to help him in defense, can only bark and complain. Beloved brother in spirit, renowned across all of Christendom for the abundance of your spiritual graces, to you alone have I desired to impart, and God is our only witness. By this tear-stained letter, under what a load of misery and what a crushing burden of worldly distractions we are weighted down. As when the whirlpools of the foaming sea send giant waves crashing on its shore rocks, and when the force of the wind and the violence of the storm overturn and shatter and sink ships, so the frail vessels of our souls are shaken by the mighty engines of our miseries and misfortunes. I am worried, not only by the thought of my own soul, but, what is still more difficult and important, by the thought of the many frail souls entrusted to my authority as abbess. All these girls and women whom I serve now, and for whom, one awful and glorious day, I shall be called to make account before the blazing throne of Christ, to account not only for my many and obvious failings, but also temptations and doubts hidden in my heart, known to God alone. To the burden of responsibility for so many frail souls, there is added the difficulty of our internal administration, our poverty, the disputes over our lack of temporal goods, the meagerness of the produce of our fields, and the never-ending demands for money for the government, demands usually based upon the spiteful accusations of those who envy us. Most of our problems arise from our obligations to the king, to the queen, to Bishop Higbold, and to the barons and counts. They see the gold and silver letters in our books, and the beauty of our tapestries, and our modern church of stone walls and lead roof, and the size of our land holdings on the mainland, and proceed to wrongly assume that we are rich and tax us accordingly. Yet despite all, I try to forgive them. From my own experience here, I know how difficult it is to rule justly and in full accordance with Christ's teachings. Since my election as abbess, I have struggled to be neither lenient nor harsh in my punishments, following as closely as possible to the rule of Benedict, with necessary modifications for our circumstances here. I make effort to never ignore the smaller sins. Immoderate laughter, gossip, dancing, celebration of a birthday, etc., which, if unaddressed, inevitably lead to more serious ones. The corrosive effect of clothing fashions is a constant problem. All nuns know Benedict's chapter 55, worry not about the color or the texture of these things, but let them wear what can be bought most cheaply. It is sufficient to have 2 tunics and 2 cowls, but few here can resist vain innovations in personal appearance. I have found it necessary to ban the following items: golden hairpins, lace shoes, fur collars, silver-buckled belts, long trains, jeweled rings, gowns cut low in front, many-colored vestments, nuns adorning themselves as if they were brides, many-colored ribbons. Although every nun knows that her veil should reach down to her eyebrows, if I do not pay attention, many nuns will gradually let their veil rise little by little, day by day, just so that she can display the skin of their forehead. Some nuns last summer actually shaved their hair over their forehead, just to make their foreheads look higher. Fashion, of course. Since you left England, this fetish of the forehead, as I call it, has obsessed almost all Northumbrian noblewomen. Many of the girls of the convent were also infected. This forehead nonsense has been strictly dealt with here, but soon there will be some new folly, I am sure. If your holy struggle is against the spiritual fickleness and faithlessness of Germans, my Alcuin, then it seems that mine is against the vanity and frivolity of English nuns. Every day, I try to remind my girls of the warning of St. Paula of Bethlehem. A clean body and a clean dress mean an unclean soul. Or, I remind them of St. Uncumber, who miraculously grew a beard on her wedding day to defend her virginity. Or St. Agatha, who sacrificed her beauty by cutting off her own nose with a knife to spite a lustful kidnapper. Or the Abbess Hilda, who wildly loved expensive gems as a youth before her call to the cloister. In particular, a red ruby on a short-necked chain. And how, many decades later, when Abbess Hilda was old, a tumor grew inside her throat, and upon it being removed from her body by a surgical physician, it was the exact size and shape and color of that ruby. Bishop Higbold has criticized me for excessive zeal against modern fashion. It is understandable that he takes such a position. Brother Alcuin, please forgive me for speaking critically of a bishop, but I cannot hide my feelings. Bishop Higbold likes to dress much too finely for a man of God. He should set a proper example. The last time I saw him, at the court at Banbury, Bishop Higbold was wearing a fine linen shirt under a sky-blue tunic. His neckline and sleeves were generously embroidered with silk. His shoes were trimmed with red-dyed leather. The curls in his hair on his forehead and by his temples came from a curling iron, fingers glittering with many rings and ending with sharpened fingernails, which he sometimes actually paints. My latest controversy involving Bishop Higbold has nothing to do with fashion, however. It has to do with oil for church services. There is a scarcity of olive oil in England, and it is almost impossible to find. We need to use olive oil for Orthodox services, of course. We are not in the days of St. Cuthbert anymore, when fish oils were acceptable substitutes. The convent had a large supply of olive oil, enough to last all this year, and some of next. I wrote that we had a large supply, using the past tense. For Bishop Higbold, I am sad to report, has taken almost all of our supply, for his own use at Banbury Cathedral. Now, we have only a few small amphorae left. I have prayed so many times to the Immaculate Virgin for the patience and fortitude to accept such treatment without complaint or obstinacy. It is not easy to remain a virtuous woman in times like ours, as I sometimes remind the Lord in my frantic prayers. With so many problems, which I have recounted at too great length, my life is a weariness. It is a burden to live. Everyone who is unequal to his own task, such as I, must seek a faithful friend, upon whose counsel she can rely, and in whom she can have such confidence that she will lay open to him every secret of her heart. On account of all these miseries, I am compelled to seek a friend in whom I can confide better than I can confide in myself, who will consider my pain and sorrow and want, who will sympathize with me, console and sustain me by his virtue and eloquence, and uplift me by his most wholesome discourse. Long have I sought, and now I know that I have found in you the friend whom I have wished, prayed, and hoped for. I have sent, along with this letter, Winbird's copy of the Universal History against the pagans, as your failing eyesight and successful scholarship require. Also, a few affectionate gifts of spices, small measures of nutmeg, dill, pepper, sugar, and cinnamon, to assist, if only slightly, in your struggles with German meals. This tribute of my heart, I know well, is a very small gift in comparison to your love and guidance, given to you, God knows, of my deep and heartfelt gratitude. I have ventured to send you these little gifts, not as if they deserved even a glance from you, but so that you may have a reminder of my obscure insignificance, to stop my being forgotten by you on account of our wide separation, and the long time that has passed since we were together. May the bond of our true affection be knit ever more closely for all time. I beg you to overlook the many errors of grammar and rhetoric in this unlearned letter, and to send me a few of your own sweet words soon, which I shall eagerly await. I also beg you, O most faithful priest, to keep the departed sisters of Lindisfarne in your memory and in your powerful prayers. The bodies of the nuns who have died in this holy place, all the humble sisters who over the decades have guarded the shrine of St. Cuthbert, shall rest side by side under the dust of our grass-grown graveyard, as if merely asleep, until to rise again on the day of judgment, when the Lord's trumpet shall sound, and all the dead shall come forth from lonely tombs to render their accounts to him. And the spirits of the righteous shall be lifted on the arms of angels, and shall forever reign. With Christ where sorrow shall vanish, envy shall fade away, and pain and lamenting shall flee before the shining faces of the saints. Farewell, my friend. When Halfdan awoke near the chilly mountain top, the two women from Starheim were already awake, Siv chopping up some freshly gathered plants with her belt knife, Ingvild piling twigs for a campfire. The younger woman saw Halfdan and said, "You were talking in your sleep." "What did I say?" "I couldn't understand most of the words," Ingvild said. "Something about King Lambie." Halfdan said, "I had a very strange dream." Ingvild said, "Tell it to my mother. She is skilled at interpreting the meaning of dreams." So Halfdan described to them what he could remember of the dream, how it had placed him and his now-dead king and his now-dead blood brothers back together in the hall, and the walls and the ceiling were covered with fire. Swirling sheets of flames covered almost everything. We were trapped. My friends and blood brothers were running around and trying to find a way out and screaming in anger at the gods for letting this happen. Evil magic was at work. The heads of King Lambie's foes on the shelves that were used for candle holders came alive again, laughing and hooting at us, grinning with eager eyes and snapping their dry jaws at us, as flames shot up from the holes in their skulls. The sacred boar pig by the king table turned into a real boar pig. Outside, there was the sound of hungry wolves howling for blood. When the boar pig knocked a hole through a wall to escape, we heard it squeal as wolves outside tore it apart. The fires inside got hotter, with the tables and chairs now covered in flames. I tried to talk to King Lambie, to explain that all this was caused by the treachery of King Jal and King Gunvald, but the roaring of the fire was so loud that he did not hear me. Then I was glad that he hadn't heard what I said, because the only reason I knew what was going on was because I had ran away, and I didn't want him to know that. I wondered if I really had ran away, because if I had, how could I now be back inside the burning hall? Siv and Ingvild were listening closely. Halfdan continued, "It was impossible for me to really be in the hall, since I had run away. Everyone there was doomed, but I was safe because I had run away and wasn't really there. The flames could not burn me. The jaws of the shelf heads could not bite into my flesh. I took out my sword and stabbed it into my own belly. It stabbed in, but there was no blood and no pain. When I pulled it out, there was no hurt. I stabbed a spear into my left hand, cutting off my smallest finger, which wriggled on the floor for a moment, then jumped back onto my hand and reattached itself. There was no scar. Somehow I used my spear to stab my own back, and again I was not harmed. With my sword again, I stabbed myself deeply in the chest, directly over my heart, but I was not harmed. Some magic was keeping me safe, but not anybody else. My blood brothers were one by one bursting into flames, running around the hall with fire all over their bodies, until their charred legs broke and they crumbled to the floor, making piles of ashes that were picked up in the roaring wind and blown around with the swirling smoke. The queens and some female servants were burning, their long and beautiful hair turned into torches, their silver necklaces and bracelets melting on blistered skin. I wanted to save King Lambie. Smoke was rising from his red silk gown and from his hair and beard. In a few moments, I knew he would burst into flame and be gone forever. I thought of picking him up and carrying him through the burning walls. But I knew that the magic would only protect me from the flames, not him. Then King Lambie ran in front of me and said, "Beer is the answer." So I picked him up He was now the size of a child, and shrinking, and carried him across the room to a big barrel of beer, somehow left untouched by the fire. King Lambie had shrunk to the size of a newborn baby when I lifted the lid of the full barrel and dropped him into the beer. The last thing he said before sinking down was, "I'll be safe here for a while." He sank under the surface with a frown on his tiny, baby-like face. By this time, I was the only one left in the hall. Except for King Lambie in the beer barrel, everyone else had burned away and their ashes were blowing into my eyes, making them water. For a while, I walked around the hall, and it seemed that it was my hall now. I went to King Lambie's king chair, which had not burned, and sat on it. I was breaking a rule, but nobody would know. I ate a bowl of fried onions that was on the unburned table in front of me, cooked for King Lambie. A platter of horsemeat sausages appeared on the table, and I ate them too. More and more of King Lambie's food appeared on the table, and I ate them all until I felt thirsty. There was no cup on the table, so I went to the barrel of beer I had dropped King Lambie into and lifted it up to my lips like a huge cup and drank. It was so cold and good that I couldn't stop myself from drinking it all. When I put the barrel down, it was empty. I had drank down King Lambie, and he was inside me. So I walked to the burning wall, where the escaping boar pig had knocked a hole. The heat was terrible, and all I could see was orange swirls. But my skin did not burn, and soon I was outside. I saw dozens of gray-furred wolves outside, waiting for me. They leaped at me, their jaws gaping wide with yellow fangs, and I fought them with my own teeth, biting their heads and backs, tossing their limp bodies to the side, and killed them all except one, who ran away into the forest shadows. I followed this surviving wolf into the woods, but soon I was lost. I wandered in the forest for a long time, until I came to a waterfall. It was peaceful there. I lay down on the mossy ground to rest, hearing the sound of water splashing into a little pool. I dreamed that I fell asleep, and I dreamed that I woke up here, right on the spot where I am now. SIV said, "You dreamed that you woke up?" "Yes. I've never had that kind of dream before," Halfdan said. "I dreamed that I was here, and I had to piss. I dreamed that my bladder was full from drinking the barrel of beer in the burning hall. So I got up and walked over there." He pointed downhill at a spot where there were some clumps of mountain grass, a pile of gray stones. "I dreamed that I pissed there, and when I was finished, an oak tree grew there very quickly. The trunk and the branches of the tree were red with steaming blood and dripping with clots of flesh and brains. But the oak leaves were all made of silver foil, delicate, shiny, beautiful, and in the wind the silver leaves all moved together and glittered like sunlight on rippled water. And that was the end of my dream." There was silence for a while. "So what did it mean?" Halfdan said. SIV said, "Dreams speak both of the past and the future. I think that the first part of your dream, in the burning hall, was of your past. You mourn King Lambie, and you feel guilty for running away. It takes little skill to figure that out," Halfdan said. SIV continued, "Drinking from the beer barrel means that King Lambie will live on inside you. Part of what he was is now part of you, and your future is not only your own. By drinking him, you let him possess you. When you drink in the future, you will then be especially close to what remains of him." Halfdan said, "What remains of him?" "Nothing remains of him but ashes, mixed with the ashes of my friends. Don't try to sell me that Valhalla nonsense about feasting in the sky with the gods. That stuff may be beautiful and poetic, but only a child or a fool thinks that life goes on after death. You don't have to be religious to believe in life after death," SIV said. "People live on in the memories of others." "Okay, I agree with that. Fame is the only real immortality that I believe in," Ingvild said. "What about the rest of the dream?" "Like I said," SIV said, "the second part of the dream is about the future. Wolves mean the approach of danger, which you will defeat. But one foe will escape to return later. The waterfall is a symbol of the gods. It seems that, though you may not believe in the gods, they believe in you. You will be their tool, for purposes beyond our understanding." Halfdan was skeptical, but said nothing. Ingvild said, "And the oak?" SIV said, "That is obvious. Odin speaks through that magic wood. and he wants you to know your fate. The blood covering the trunk and the branches show that your life will be full of violence and loss and crime. You will suffer much, do many bad things, and die unhappy. Ingvild, upset, put a hand over her mouth and watched Halfdan closely. Halfdan shrugged. I don't care, he said. Ingvild said, and the silver leaves? Don't they foretell wealth and success? Siv said, but for who? There may be wealth and success for him, or maybe for his children, or maybe for everybody in the kingdom. The symbolism is vague, but the overall picture of Halfdan's future is very dark. As dark as his face? Ingvild said. Siv made a half-smile at her daughter's joke, then went back to chopping plants for their breakfast. After they ate, Ingvild asked Halfdan, where will you go now? Halfdan shrugged. I would like to go nowhere. Just lie down and wait for worms to drag me underground. Ingvild said, what about justice? Halfdan sneered and said, King Lambie and my friends are gone. Nothing I do will bring them back. So, you will make peace with the killers? Ingvild said, no, not that. If you don't go for justice, Ingvild said, you will have no choice but peace with King Jarl and King Gunvald. They will rule Fjordan, and all will have to accept their rule. Or I can leave. Go into exile. That's all I deserve. My father was exiled when I was small. I could follow him east, try to find out where he went. Maybe he is still alive somewhere. Siv said, the life of an exile is wretched. But you predicted that my life is going to be wretched no matter what I do. So I might as well live out my wretched life in some outlandish place where there will be less around to remind me. Ingvild said, people may call you a coward for that. Halfdan's oak-brown eyes flashed with fury. Are you calling me a coward? He shouted. No, but other people might. Halfdan gripped the axe and said, if they do, I'll cut off their heads. Ingvild continued, do you have a family? 2 aunts and 2 uncles and some cousins. Haven't seen any of them since last year. They will hear of the hall burning and that you ran away from it. They will hear that your king was murdered and that you chose exile over justice. If your uncle and aunt and cousins call you a coward, will you come back from exile to cut off their heads too? Halfdan glared at her. What do you know about it? This is man's business. Man's business? Ingvild said sarcastically. But can a coward be a man? Siv snapped. Enough. Ingvild, you go too far. Halfdan looked ready to jump to his feet and swing his axe at Siv's taunting daughter. He said, hold your snake tongue, bitch. Nobody calls me a coward. Yet, Ingvild sneered. Siv quickly stood up and grabbed her daughter's arm, pulling her away. We are going to talk, Siv said, pulling Ingvild by an arm away from the furious Halfdan. They went a few steps away, too far for Halfdan to hear them, and Siv said, what are you doing? That man with an axe, is a dangerous fighter, if not some kind of black troll, and you are goading him without any mercy. Don't you know that a maddened dog will bite even a friendly hand? Why provoke him? Ingvild said, because I want justice for our butchered and raped friends. He can help. Forget about what happened in Eid, Siv said. I can't. Siv said, I knew them longer than you did, and I will just go back to Starheim to get on with my life. That is what Maris and Jan would have wanted us to do. Mourn them, then move on. Halfdan is right. Revenge is man's business. Then think of me as your son, for I want it. You may have known Maris and Jan longer than I, but I knew them since my earliest childhood, played in front of their fire, stole sweets from their kitchen cupboard. I just can't walk away from all those memories without a protest. And what about Winche? She was just a serving girl, but we were close. After my husband left, she was really the only one who understood how I felt, because she had been abandoned too. Winche was like a sister to me, and I cannot just walk away from her fate. How many of Njal and Gunvald's men abused Winche before the mercy of a cut neck? Do we live in a community where brutal crimes can happen to folk, and those who love them do nothing? Siv said, this anger did not begin 2 nights ago. You have been bitter for a long time. If you had a husband to go home to, would you feel this way? Ingvild was silent. Siv said, this will not bring Gunnar back. I do not want my treacherous husband back, Ingvild said. I want justice. Call it revenge. and it is a dangerous game. Then stay out of it, mother, and let me do what I want." When they walked back to Halfdan, he said to Ingvild, "You were right. I have decided to get revenge on King Jal and King Gunvald. Kill them both and preserve my reputation. I am not a coward and will give nobody a reason to say that." Ingvild said, "Good for you," and smiled at it for the first time. Siv scowled, saying, "How will you kill them?" "I don't know." Ingvild said, "All you need to do is get close enough to them to throw a spear or shoot an arrow. By the time anybody figures out what happened, you will be gone." "I can't do that. If you aren't skilled with those weapons, let me help you. I'm a good archer and can even hit a running squirrel with an arrow. Help me get close enough to them, and I'll do it." Siv stood, still scowling, and walked away. Halfdan said to Ingvild, "That's not what I meant. I'm a good shot with a bow too, and can throw a spear well. But I don't like your plan. It is shameful to do a sneak murder. Men should be killed face to face, so they know who killed them. And besides, kings have so many bodyguards that I would never get close enough. What is wrong with your mother?" Ingvild moved to sit on a rock closer to Halfdan and said, "She is just moody. What making about a kind of trap like for wild beasts? Dig a hole in the ground where the kings are going to walk, put spikes on the bottom, hide the hole." Halfdan shook his head. "That's also a kind of sneak murder. And it wouldn't work because kings always walk around in the middle of a crowd. A few bodyguards in front might fall in, that's all. And how would I know where these kings plan to go for a stroll? That plan would take too much luck to succeed. Then what are you going to do? Go home to OS and get some men to join me. A group is stronger than just one man." Ingvild said, "I said, I'm good with an arrow. And I said, revenge is man's business. The killing part may be, but what about helping you? You were seen by some of the foes, and they must have told the kings that you escaped and what you look like. Fighters will be looking for you all over the kingdom, and the kings might have offered a reward for anyone who catches you and brings you to them. Your looks are easy to recognize. Anyone you meet could be an informer. How are you going to get from here all the way to OS without somebody seeing you? I'll stay in the woods. What will you eat? Animals, wild plants." Ingvild thought for a while, then asked, "And how will you get across the fjord?" "Swim with that axe. I can steal a boat." "Easier said than done. Wouldn't you like me to come with you, for some company in the woods, and an extra pair of eyes to look out for danger, and my bow and arrows to help you get out of trouble?" "But you are a woman." Before answering, Ingvild yawned and stretched both her arms back, causing her chest to bulge at Halfdan. She saw him look at the shirt cloth tightening over her big breasts. Ingvild said, "Yes, I am." After a pause, Halfdan glanced down at the key on her belt and said, "Where is your husband?" "I don't know. He left me." "Why?" "Because the unlucky fool gambled more silver on horse fighting than he could afford to pay. I told him to fight a duel against the man he owed the silver to, so he could cancel the debt with spear and sword, but he was too afraid." "No, you didn't want to go with him?" "He didn't ask me. He just left, and I hope the trolls get him. Anyway, listen to this. If you let me join you, I can go into the towns we pass. Nobody will be looking for me. I can buy food and ask questions, collecting information that can help you. And I can rent or buy a boat to get across the fjord." "Do you have silver for a boat?" "No, but you do. We could chop a piece off that." She pointed at his silver belt buckle. Halfdan whined, "But this was my lord's first gift to me. I can't spend it." "Yes, you can, because it wasn't a gift. It was a loan. Now it's time to pay it back. To revenge your murdered lord." Halfdan said, "Why do you want me to do this?" "Because of your murdered friends." "Yes. And is that why Siv is so upset?" "My mother wants to keep me out of danger." As if making herself more comfortable, Ingvild moved her legs slightly apart. That pulled the cloth of her dress up, showing Halfdan her leg up to her knee. Ingvild said, "She also wants to keep your body out of mine." There was a silence. "So, can I travel with you to OS?" "If you want," Halfdan said. Ingvild smiled again, seeing that she ruled him. She said, "I'll tell my mother. We should leave soon. We have been sitting and talking up here long enough." Halfdan said, "Siv is not coming with us too." "I know," Ingvild said. As a healer, she used to travel around a lot, and has friends in many different towns. We will find someplace safe to leave her. Nothing worth describing happened until they walked down from the mountains and reached a town called Lone. SIV had friends there who would let SIV stay with them as long as she wanted. Don't go with that man, SIV told Ingvild in private. Don't join your fate to his. I feel what is going to happen. If you go, I will never see you again. But Ingvild was stubborn. She walked alone into the woods, carrying a bag of food and blankets and other supplies, to where Halfdan was waiting for her in hiding. News of the events in Eid had not yet reached the folk of Lone. Halfdan and Ingvild walked along forest trails, north towards the fjord, and sometimes Halfdan's axe hacked a path through thick and unmarked woods. Halfdan did not talk much. To pass the time, Ingvild would ask him questions like, "Who was the first man you killed?" "His name was Canute the Loud," Halfdan said. "Why did you kill him?" "It was before I joined King Lambie. I was 14 or 15 years old. I was working for a shepherd in OS who hired me to watch over his sheep in their grazing land. Canute the Loud was my master's neighbor. Every day, Canute's sheep used to cross over the stream that divided the properties, and they would eat the grass on my master's side. I stopped that by throwing pebbles at Canute's sheep whenever they tried to cross, and soon they gave up and stayed on Canute's side. Canute did not like this, nor did his wife like it, and she had a tongue like yours. So one day he found me and tried to beat me with his walking stick. I took the stick away from him and beat him with it until he seemed dead. Then I dragged him home to his wife. I told her what had happened, so nobody could charge me with sneak murder. He wasn't dead after all, but died soon. My master only had to pay a little bit of silver to the widow, because the killing had been provoked. How many other men have you killed? Over 20. Less than 30. One before I joined the hall, Canute, and the rest after, on King Lambie's orders. You don't know the exact number? Sometimes you can't tell if you killed someone or just hurt them. What killing do you remember the most? Halfdan was silent for a while. Then he said, I don't think about any of them much, and refused to answer any more of her questions for a while. She saw that he was in a sour mood. Most men like to brag of their killings, but maybe Halfdan was different. At the next break, Ingvild told him to rest his head on her lap so that she could pick lice out of his hair and beard. There were lots of them, and fleas that hopped from her busy fingers, and one blood-fat tick. Her gentle grooming made Halfdan feel better. He closed his eyes as she worked on him, and he even smiled when she was done, saying, "Thank you. You're welcome. Now I'll do it to you." But he couldn't find any lice or fleas in her long yellow hair. "How do you stay so clean?" he asked. Lifting her head from his lap and standing up, she said, "I comb my hair every morning, and every bath day I soak in a potion made from magic plants. I usually can't get a comb through my tangles," Halfdan said, gesturing at his puffed-out mass of black curls. "But I'd like to try that magic potion. I hate having those little beasts on me all the time. If I find the right plants, I'll make you some." That night, after they ate and were sitting by a small fire, Ingvild said, "Now that it's only the two of us, I think we should talk about sleeping arrangements." Halfdan looked at her, nervous. "Why we need to talk about that?" he said. Ingvild said, "I've seen how you look at me. A fighter in a famous hall, working for a rich and generous king. You're probably used to girls shamelessly throwing themselves at you, like cats in heat. You probably can't even remember the number of girls who have fallen for you. Probably don't think about any of them much. But that's not my fate. Im nopoliting. I didn't think anything like that. I know you're married. Yes, I am. Being abandoned doesn't change that. The proper way to handle the sleeping arrangements is for you to sleep over there." She pointed at some shadowy bushes to her right. "While I sleep over there." She pointed left at other forest shadows, far from the fire. "Fine," Halfdan said. But Ingvild said it is cold at night, and when the campfire goes down, having another body close makes it a lot easier to sleep. And good sleep keeps folk healthy. You don't want us to get sick in the middle of this adventure, do you? No, it would be foolish to let ourselves get sick. We need to stay healthy. So I think we should sleep lying close together, but not touching. Just for warmth. Sharing our blankets, but nothing else. Can I trust you not to touch me?" Late that night, as they lay close but not touching, on a flat pile of soft spruce branches and under thick wool blankets made in Lone, Ingvild whispered to Halfdan, "Are you still awake?" "Yes." "Why?" "Thinking." "Me too. And I'm cold. Do you want me to feed the fire another log?" "I think we should sleep closer together. Then we would be touching. As long as it's innocent and only for warmth. Nothing more. He moved closer to her, very nervous, his heart pounding. He said, "Probably the warmest thing for you would be if I lay on top of you." Also, breathing faster than before, Ingvild whispered, "Good idea." They stopped talking. "You seduced me," Ingvild said afterwards, holding him close. "I did," Halfdan said, sounding proud. "Batman, my mother was right about you." Now they could sleep. Their journey to OS took 5 days. Now and then, Ingvild would leave the forest to get food and information. From some beggar women washing clothes at a stream, Ingvild learned that the new rulers of Fjordain had sent armed riders to many of the towns. Fighters from Son and Ford had rampaged through the towns, stealing all the silver they could find, killing anyone who resisted. "They call it tax collecting," a beggar woman said. They were also collecting men. They had a list of names of nobles who had been close to King Lambie. Many of these folk were killed, and the rest were taken under guard to Eid. Ingvild asked if the tax collectors had reached Lone yet. The beggar women did not know. "Are they looking for a fighter with dark looks who ran away from the burning?" One of the beggar women had heard about that, and that a reward of much silver had been offered for help catching or killing Halfdan. Ingvild walked into a shore town and tried to rent a boat to cross the fjord. As she was a stranger and claimed to be traveling alone, folk were suspicious of her and would not rent a boat to her. With a chopped-off piece of Halfdan's silver belt buckle, she convinced a fisherman to sell her an old boat he did not use anymore. They crossed the fjord at night. The wind and the waves were strong as Halfdan rowed. The wave rocking of the boat, with the boat's strong smell of fish, made Halfdan sick. Twice he pulled in the oars and leaned over the side, throwing up oatmeal and bits of pig meat sausage into the moon-reflecting water. "Do you always get seasick on the water?" Ingvild asked. "Usually at first. I get used to it after a while, usually. But as a ship raider, you must have sailed and rowed all over. That doesn't sound like a good job for you." Halfdan said seasickness was a small price to work for King Lambie. He was a great man, and the world will never see another like him. "Are you crying?" "No, you are. It's not shameful to mourn losing your king and so many friends." "I'm not crying." He started rowing again. September 11, year of our Lord 792, to my beloved sister worthy of all honor, the Abbess Tetta, praiseworthy for your long observance of the monastic life. Alcuin, servant of the servants of God, wishes you eternal welfare in Christ. May the eternal rewarder of good works give joy on high among the choirs of angels to my dearest sister, who has brought light and consolation to an exile in Germany by sending him gifts of spiritual writing. For no man can shine light on these gloomy swamps of the German people and take heed of the traps that line his path unless he has the word of God as a lamp to guide his feet and a light to shine on his way. As my soul thanks you for the book, so my tongue and stomach thank you for the generous donation of spices. Although hunger can make bitter things sweet, sugar from a friend is sweeter still. I assure you, Tetta, that with each spoonful of my meals flavored with your gifts, I remember how blessed am I to have you as a dear friend, my dearest friend, I blush to confess. When I was in Northumbria, the nearness of your love would give me great joy. But now that I am so far from you in this rude and savage land, the thought of you pains me day and night. Yet how weak and selfish it is for me to dwell on my insignificant loneliness. It would be more fitting to rejoice greatly that now, in these final days of a wicked world, the Lord Jesus has such women to praise his holy name and preach the truth and seek after wisdom as you. You who gently leads a militia of marching virgins across the battlefield of souls, despite fearful temptations on every side, all of you armed with invincible weapons of piety and learning. Often here, in my loneliness, I imagine your mild-hearted militia of girls and women singing sweet hymns of spiritual combat, of Christ's victory, and the eternal occupation of heaven. Temporal things pass away, but the never-changing will soon be here. Treasures will melt like shadows, or smoke, or sea foam. Men who wallow in luxury know not that they are spinning fragile webs that catch only dust. They gather treasure and know not for whom they gather it. Lowly as I am, I have tried to avoid the sin of ostentatious fashion and to dress in accordance with Benedict's rules. It saddens and dismays me to hear that Bishop Higbold has chosen to dress like his luxurious brothers and uncles, rather than as commanded in Scripture by our Father. He has apparently changed greatly in the years since I last visited Northumbria. Rest assured that I shall discreetly write to Rome of this, without identifying my informant. Brave Teta, I urge you to continue to strive with all your might against foolish distractions and superstitions in dress. These are hateful to God. Modern fashions, as some call them, but which I call modern foulness, are sent by the Antichrist to herald his coming. Through his craftiness, he introduces into monasteries and nunneries his servants of fashion and vanity, soon followed by laziness and disobedience. Then lust and fornication, both natural and otherwise. Teta, your struggle is truly against the fever of Lucifer, the blackest of sins, the ruin of souls. So I applaud and commend you on your firmness in discipline regarding your flock. As Benedict wrote, nuns who are respectful and remorseful, let them be corrected at the first and second offense only with words, but let the abbess chastise nuns who are wicked and disobedient at the very first offense with whips and other bodily punishments, knowing it is written in Scripture, fools are not corrected with words, and hit your son with a rod, to deliver his soul from death. As you struggle against the gentle impulses in your so-good soul, meek Teta, to discipline your feminine flock, to give them transitory suffering for the sake of eternal salvation. So do I, Alcuin the scholar, struggle to deal firmly with the Germans. My rod is the Frankish army of King Charlemagne, which chastises any still defiant German tribes, brings the submissive tribes to baptisms, and protects my priests bearing holy writ from one town to another. What a challenge it is to force truth into these ignorant minds. I have been given precise and detailed instructions from His Holiness himself on the proper way to use logical arguments to convert German tribes and individuals. We are told not to argue about the family histories of the Germans' false gods. We are told to pretend to accept the statement that German pagan gods were given birth by other gods after the intercourse of male gods with female gods. Then His Holiness instructs we are able to prove by logic that each of their gods had a beginning, since they were created by some other god. After forcing the pagan to concede that point, we are told to ask whether the universe itself had a beginning or was always in existence. If the pagan says that the universe had a beginning, we ask, what were the pagan gods doing before that time? If the pagan insists that the universe had no beginning, we ask, when was the first pagan god born? Who were its parents? How did pagan gods gain control of a universe that existed before them? Why do pagan gods care about human sacrifices if they already possess and control everything? Why do pagan gods allow Christian men to rule the warm European lands rich in food and wine, while leaving the pagans only the frozen lands of the north? Why is the Christian world dominant, while those clinging to primitive beliefs are a dwindling minority? These questions, and many others that it would be tedious to mention, are put to the leaders and common people of the pagans, not in an offensive and irritating way, but calmly and with great moderation. From time to time, their superstitions are compared with our Christian dogmas and touched upon indirectly, so that they might realize the absurdity of their primitive beliefs, and may be ashamed to know that their disgusting swamp rituals have not escaped our notice. Perhaps the strongest argument against the ancestral superstitions of the Germans was made by myself. Almost a year ago, in the Hesse region, there was a so-called holy tree growing there, which the pagans claimed was personally guarded by Thor. I ordered that old oak to be chopped down and called out for Thor to strike me with one of his famous thunderbolts, if he existed. The local pagans who were watching from behind the line of Frankish soldiers looked up at the sky in anticipation of my doom. When nothing happened, I announced to the crowd gathered around the fallen tree, either Thor does not exist or he is too weak to fight against the power of Christ. A huge step towards converting this tribe. Before I end this too verbose letter, I wish to show my gratitude for your gifts and your friendship by supporting your important work at lovely Lindisfarne. You mentioned the shortage of olive oil in England, and the risk this poses to liturgical practice. Olive oil is scarce also in Germany, but my direct supply from Rome is secure. Separately from this letter, I have sent you 5 amphorae of good virgin olive oil. It should arrive at Lindisfarne a few weeks after this letter. Do not be surprised when you find your gift accompanied by 4 cage hunting falcons. They are not for you, of course, but for the king. He asked me for German falcons many months ago. When the hunting birds arrive at Lindisfarne, please send word to the mainland, and the king will send someone to your island to collect them. Farewell, and may you continue to live a life of angelic purity until you reign forever in heaven. Halfdan lay on his belly on a dark farm field, on barley stubble left from the harvest, not moving at all. His breathing was slow. The axe was in one hand. After a long wait, Halfdan slowly lifted his arm and moved it slightly forward. Slowly, he laid it down. He did not move again until after taking many slow, steady breaths. Then he slowly moved his other arm forward, slowly lifted a leg forward. A long pause. Then he shifted his other leg forward. He lay still for a long time. A silent bird fluttered past in the dim space over Uncle Harold's farmland. Halfdan raised his head and torso, slowly moved forward a bit. He lowered himself again to the ground and was still for a long, long time. He was heading upwind, so his uncle's dogs would not catch his smell and start barking. Exiled was behind him, in the dark woods where they had spent most of the afternoon watching the farm. It was possible that King Lambie's killers knew where Halfdan's family lived. It was possible that their fighters were waiting for Halfdan to show up here, to kill or arrest him. But he and Exiled had seen nothing to raise suspicion. Staying concealed, they had searched all of the woods that circled the small property where he had grown up. They had watched Uncle Harold limping out of the well-made oak plank house, and had watched him set up an iron forge behind the chicken shed and wait for the charcoal fire to get blue hot. There was a loud, clanging sound as his hammer pounded a red-hot piece of iron. Halfdan's Aunt Anna, the sister of his father, had brought out a plate of food and a cup of beer, and her husband took a break. Even from a distance, both of them had looked older than he remembered. He had not been home in a long time, as earlier mentioned. Halfdan and Exiled had watched Aunt Anna drag a heavy basket out the front door and hang rugs and drapes and wall coverings over a pole, then use a paddle to knock out dust. When it started getting dark, both went inside. Soon a line of smoke twisted up from the hole in the grass-covered roof. Halfdan had waited for full darkness, then started a slow crawl towards the house. King Lambie had taught him this and many other military skills. Halfdan could hear King Lambie's voice in his ears. The way to be invisible is to move very slowly. Motion is what attracts eyes. You can avoid being noticed, even on open ground, by moving slow enough. Your body might be visible, but it won't be noticed until you put your iron into the foe's guts. Halfdan was looking ahead very closely, hearing King Lambie's ghostly voice in his ears say, "Divide all that you can see into sections, and look at each section in turn, paying attention to every detail. Look at each one of the sections of your view as closely as you can, and make sure you check all of them, even if it seems impossible for a foe to be hiding there. And don't look just to the front. When you get the chance, look backwards to see any foe sneaking from behind." Not wanting to make motion by turning his head, Halfdan could not look behind him during his crawl across the field of barley stubble. He only looked forward at the familiar farmhouse and its surroundings. Exiled was guarding his back. Her task was to watch from her forest hiding place, and, if he was attacked, to use her arrows to protect him. It took Halfdan half the night to make it across the dark field to the farmhouse. He crouched by the door, which was decorated with a sheep's body hanging by its cut neck from a bronze hook, a sacrifice to Freya. His relatives were devout, but had failed to spread their love of the gods to him. Halfdan put his ear to the thick wood of the door and listened. Nothing at first. Then, the faint sound of Harold snoring. There seemed no other noise. It was unlikely that foes had spent all of the afternoon in the house while his aunt and uncle were going about their business outside, but possible. He strained his ears to catch the sounds of armed, awake men waiting for him. Iron clinking, boots scraping on the dirt floor, whispering, burping, farting, sighs of boredom. But there was nothing but Harold's faint, recognizable snore. still crouching, so his full height would not be visible at the door. Halfdan raised his axe and tapped the square end of its heavy blade onto the door. The snoring inside stopped. After a while, there was a rustling sound on the other side of the door, and Halfdan heard his uncle say, "Is somebody out there?" Hearing that gruff voice, Halfdan smiled. In a voice barely loud enough to be heard through the door, he said, "No life here, but a lazy owl who's hungry, but won't hunt good man. I beg a meal, open your house. Toss me a mouse." Anna's voice cried out inside, "It's Halfdan!" The sound of the door latch raising, and the door opened to show the sleepy-looking faces of his aunt and uncle. His aunt looked delighted to see him, squealing, "Come in." But Harold looked nervous, glancing over Halfdan's shoulder. Harold grabbed his nephew's sleeve and pulled him inside. As Anna hugged him, Harold slid the wooden latch on the door shut. Uncle Harold said, "Too many syllables in the last line." Aunt Anna said, "Oh, Harold, do you expect a hungry owl to follow all the rules of poetry?" Halfdan felt the strength in his uncle's grip as they shook hands. "I'm glad to see you alive," Uncle Harold said. He was a thick-bodied man with a wide, gray-bearded face and watery blue eyes. People said that he was one of the best farmers in OS. He not only fed his family, but had earned and saved enough silver over the years to buy a farm for both of his two sons, and to pay a good dowry on his daughter's wedding day, and to pay Halfdan's admittance fee for joining the Hall in Eid. He was one of the richest and most respected men in OS. He was the closest thing to a father Halfdan had known, and had taught Halfdan a lot. Aunt Anna was thin, a bit taller than her husband, with hands that fluttered at her sides when she talked. There was a scar from a horse kick on the left side of her face, which she usually hid under her haircloth. She had been the only mother Halfdan had ever known, treating him the same as her natural children, comforting him the many times he came home in tears over some other child calling him a black troll, praising his earliest poems, and he loved her greatly. This place had been Halfdan's home for many years. The house was much the same as when Halfdan was a boy. It was a single room, windowless except for the smoke hole in the roof, with low platforms for sitting and sleeping along both of the side walls. A long, central fireplace with still glowing embers gave off some light, as did the beeswax candle that Aunt Anna lit and put onto a low table near them. She said, "Something to eat? We're all out of mice, dear, but there might be some cheese and smoked salmon." "Yes, please," Halfdan said, sitting on the platform and resting his axe on the floor. As she took the food from a wood chest and put it onto the little table, Halfdan told them what had happened in Eid and how he had run away. "We heard about the hall burning, and that only a black-looking fighter escaped," Harold said. "When the San horsemen came here, they asked folk about you, but nobody told them that this is your hometown. Have they come here?" "They have, demanding silver and searching the house. But they did that to everybody. I don't think that they're likely to come back, at least until next tax time. You can hide out here as long as you need." "Right, Anna?" "Of course. Now eat." As Halfdan took bread and piled it with slices of yellow sheep cheese and smelly pink fish, he said, "I'm not going to stay here and put you two in danger." "Then what are you going to do?" "Get revenge." Aunt Anna's happy expression changed to worry. Uncle Harold said, "Isn't killing two kings a bit ambitious?" "Right. So I came here to get help. There must be men around here who aren't happy with what happened." "Nobody is happy about it, Uncle Harold. Lambie was a great ruler, one of us. But that doesn't mean that folk are eager to get killed for the memory of a dead man." Aunt Anna said, "And the pains in your uncle's leg have gotten worse. He can barely walk most days, never mind trying to fight. Isn't that right, Harold?" He looked embarrassed and scowled. "Quiet. My leg is strong enough to fight if I so decide. In the Swedish War, there were a lot of older men, older than I am now, who spilled their share of blood." "Oh, Harold," she said, shaking her head. Halfdan said, "Uncle, I don't want you to join me in this. You wouldn't be able to keep up, and I don't want to take you away from Aunt Anna. I want young, single, ambitious men. You've done your fighting. Stay here and enjoy your farm and your grandchildren." "How are Einar and Indra?" "The twin sons of Halfdan's foster sister." Aunt Anna beamed and said, "So cute and so smart. Barely a year old, and both of them can say cake and no, and up, and some other words. Indra will peacefully stare at the fire for hours, like you would, though Einar is more of an active type and likes to crawl all over the place, putting all he can into his mouth. You haven't seen them yet, have you? Not yet. I was planning to come back this summer to see them, and you too, but other things kept getting in the way, and I kept putting it off. I know that Lise, Halfdan's foster sister, would love a chance to show off the babies to you. It's amazing how they can make folk laugh. Maybe it would inspire some ideas in you. Yes, that was a hint. You need a woman who will make you want to settle down and have babies. Halfdan rolled his eyes, saying nothing about Ingvild. Harold said, "Tell me about your plans." "How many men do you need?" "As many as possible," Halfdan said. "And I'd like your help. You want me to go around to all the young, single, ambitious men around here, those who can be trusted to keep their mouths shut, and recruit them for you." "Yes. Tell them I want to meet them tomorrow night." "Where?" "I was thinking about near the sacred swamp. Nobody goes there at night. The gods might be offended by you using their sanctuary for that. It might bring bad luck, and folk might get lost trying to get there in the dark. A better place would be at your parents' memorial stone." Halfdan had not been there for many years. He said, "Good. We'll meet there, pick a leader, and leave. Each of them is to bring weapons, blankets, food, and water containers." "What about horses?" "We'll have to stay off the roads." "No horses." "Anything else?" "No." "Fine. I'll do it tomorrow," Harold said. "Now it's very late. Let's talk about it more in the morning." Halfdan said, "I'm not sleeping here. Too dangerous." Harold said, "Nonsense. I told you. Nobody told the new rulers that you were from around here. There's no chance of anybody showing up here tonight to search the place. You're safe here." Halfdan said, "I mean, it's too dangerous for you. If a neighbor sees me and later tells a fighter from Son or Ford that I was here, they'll kill both of you for giving me shelter. We're dealing with bad men." Aunt Anna said, "Halfdan, this is all sounding too crazy. Can't you just go into exile for a while? Come back when things have calmed down?" "I thought about that," Halfdan said. "But if I don't do this, there will be nothing for me. Wherever I go, I'll find nothing to live for. I made a vow to King Lambie and must keep it." She said, "Is that it? Or are you just worried that people will say you weren't brave enough? Don't try to talk me out of it." Anna, Uncle Harold said, putting a big, sun-brown hand on her thin, paler hand. "Let Halfdan do what he thinks he has to do. He's not a child anymore. And he made a vow to a man who is now dead. He just said some words, which the wind blew away as soon as they were spoken. Is that a good reason to risk death?" Halfdan said, "No life can last longer than all-ruling fate allows when a debt to death is due. Do not fear to disappear." Aunt Anna, unhappy, said nothing. Uncle Harold said, "Did you make that one up?" "No." Halfdan said, "I know your style too well to be fooled." "Whose is it?" "King Lambie's." Uncle Harold said, "People say that he could see into the future. Lambie probably foresaw how his life would end. That poem sounds like he did." A thought came to Uncle Harold, and he scowled. "I just remembered something that I heard when I was at the market," he said. "I don't know how true it is, but someone who had come from Ede told it to me. Apparently, King Jal of San went digging around in the ashes of the hall and found King Lambie's body. It was burnt and charred, but they could recognize his jewelry and sword." Halfdan put his hands over his eyes. "What did they do to it?" "I'm sorry to have to tell you this." "Well, the man said that Njal cut off the head of King Lambie's burnt body and tied it to the saddle on his horse, like a decoration. He rides around everywhere with King Lambie's fire-black skull hanging there, bouncing beside his leg." And Anna said, "Why would anyone do such a nasty thing?" Uncle Harold shrugged. "I can figure it out," Halfdan said, the look in his eyes turning hard. "It's proof of the change in government, and to make folk afraid. The kings of Son and Ford will rule by fear until one or both of them gets elected king of Fjordain and makes their rule legitimate. Election time is almost a year away," Uncle Harold said. "They want to keep everybody poor and terrified until then. It makes sense. Nobody in Fjordain wants our kingdom turned into a vassal state of Son and Ford, and the only way to get us to vote for Njal and Gunvald as king is through hard oppression, making all Fjordain folk too intimidated to campaign for the kingship against those bloody-handed outlander shits." Aunt Anna said to Halfdan, If exile is out of the question, then I hope you kill them all. I'll try, Halfdan said. No more is recorded of their conversation. When Halfdan left, carrying a bag of food and the axe, he walked slowly back across the harvested farm field, back to where Ingvild, sitting with her back to a tree, bow and arrows still in her hands, had fallen asleep. Halfdan covered her legs and belly with a blanket, then crouched to look closely at her shadowy face for a long time. In sleep, she looked beautiful, gentle, and peaceful. When early sunlight woke her, he was still awake, still looking closely at her. Squinting, she smiled up at him and said, "How did it go? So what's next?" Ingvild was as beautiful awake as sleeping, but not as gentle, not as peaceful. "Let's go," he said. The memorial stone, and others much like it, were on some flat ground near a bend in a path up to the mountains. Other than an occasional shepherd bringing a herd to or from pasture, few used this out-of-the-way path. The runes on the man-sized chunk of rough gray granite sticking from the ground read, G empty set D of OS left and never returned Asa of Nubia died here, runes carved by their son Halfdan after darkness fell. The men Uncle Harold had spoken to started showing up. Halfdan and Ingvild greeted each of them with handshakes and explanations. Some of them he did not recognize. Halfdan had lived away from OS for 11 years, and some of these men had been children when he left. He recognized most of those who were around his own age, and was pleased to see some of the area's best brawlers. One of these was Atli the Red, so called because of the color of his hair and beard. He was a very smart man, capable in most things, though not very confident or assertive. He and Halfdan had grown up on neighboring farms, but had never been close friends, although Halfdan greatly respected Atli's wisdom and calm, stubborn character, and skill at poetry. Atli showed up at the meeting because of his political beliefs. He did not want to be ruled by men who had killed Lambie, and who were terrorizing innocent folk, and who were outlanders from Sonnenfjord. Fjordain should be ruled by a Fjordain man. Another good recruit was Haki the Berserker. Haki was a thick-armed and tall bully who had once earned a living by traveling from town to town, challenging men to duels. These men could either pay Haki to cancel the duel or fight, in which case Haki would kill them and become the legal owner of all the duel losers' property. Haki had duel-challenged dozens of unlucky men, earning a fortune in land and silver, but his passion for gambling and whoring meant that he was usually broke. Earlier this year, he had been outlawed by the Fjordain Assembly for his many notorious wrongs, which meant that anybody who wanted it could kill him without penalty, even if it was a sneak killing. Unlike most outlaws, Haki did not go into exile, and he went around openly daring the families of his victims to try vengeance on him. None so far had dared, and Haki went on doing as he pleased. The only difference being an outlaw meant to Haki was that he could no longer force other men to duel. As an outlaw, his challenges could be ignored without shame. So he was looking for something else to do. Fighting to avenge King Lambie sounded fun and, if successful, would bring silver. Some of the 22 young men who met with Halfdan that night were there for political ideals like Atli. Others had a grudge over a family member who had been killed or raped by tax collectors, or they themselves had been treated badly and were after revenge like Ingvild and Halfdan. But most shared motives with Haki, ambition and small-town boredom. They were younger sons who knew that an eldest brother would inherit all of their father's farm or fishing boat or flock of sheep. Without inherited property, they would need luck to find any work that paid well enough to support a wife and family, if they were also lucky enough to find someone to marry. There were always more single men than women around here, as it was customary then to drown unwanted babies, and mothers mostly drowned daughters, so women could choose from many suitors, usually choosing one with inherited property. Younger brothers, denied inheritance and wife, knew of Halfdan's reputation and joined him in hope of getting rich through war, or at least getting out of OS for some excitement. One of the last recruits to arrive was called Fisk the Bone Chewer. Fisk was Halfdan's cousin, the youngest son of Halfdan's uncle Gunnar, Godrod's brother, and Aunt Ragnhild. Fisk was 19 years of age and very skilled at hunting. After embracing Halfdan, Fisk said to everybody, "I have news. My brother Ole just got off a ship that was in Eid yesterday, where Ole heard that King Gunvald is dead. People say that King Jal killed him, stabbed him in the back while they were drinking together, or so folk said. Then there was a battle in Eid between King Jal and his son, fighters against the fighters from Ford who had served King Gunvald. King Jal's side did better in the fighting, though lots of men on both sides were killed. After the battle, most of the surviving Ford men went onto their ships and sailed back to Ford, very angry. Some Ford fighters switched allegiance and stayed in Eid to serve King Jal. Folk in Eid say that there are still bad feelings between these side switchers and the real San men because of the battle. Things are very confused over there. Atli said, "That is good news for us." "There's more," Fisk said. "Ole heard a rumor. He doesn't know how true it is, that King Jal is not well. Whether hurt in the battle or just sick, that's not known, but people in Eid think something is definitely wrong with him. Nobody has seen him in the streets since the battle, and he used to ride around all the time, showing off King Lambie's head on his saddle string and looking for young girls to rape in front of their parents. Of the two kings, Jal was always the worst, and folk in Eid are sacrificing lots of beasts for the gods to not let him recover." Everybody offered their opinions on this news, asking questions that Fisk did not know enough to answer, until Haki said, "Enough. Whether we go to Eid to kill one foe, king, or two, the important thing is that we go." Both Halfdan and Haki volunteered to be war chief. There was a vote. The only weapons raised for Haki belonged to Haki and his big cousin, Sten. Haki shrugged and stayed calm. Halfdan had all the OS men swear an oath not to abandon the feud until King Jal or they were destroyed, and all agreed that anybody who broke the oath would lose their life. Halfdan and Ingvild went where the others couldn't hear, and Halfdan said, "You cannot come with us now." She protested, "I know healing. If a man gets hurt fighting, I can treat him, and if things get really desperate, I can help out with my arrows. I'm not saying that you would not be useful, but there are two reasons why you can't come. First, with one woman in a group of 23 young, single men, there will be problems. But I'm yours," Ingvild said. "Tell them that with enough authority, and they'll leave me alone. Some would, some might not. For the war chief to bring along a woman as pretty as you, while the others are alone and far from home, will lead to jealousy. And the other reason, because I don't want you to be hurt. Some of us will probably die soon. I do not want one to be you. After this is all done, I'll send for you. If you abandon me now, maybe I won't want you then. I hope you do. If not, that's your decision. You troll, let me come with you. I'll go into the woods to cut off my hair and dress as a male, then come back here and say I'm a new recruit. Ingvar the Beardless." Halfdan smiled and said, "And how will you hide those?" Glancing at her chest, "A belt under my shirt can squash me flat." "Unlikely. You have to stay behind." "No." When Halfdan kissed her, her lips stayed tight and cold. He turned away, went back to the men, picked up his bag and axe. Ingvild stood by Godrod and As's weather-worn stone, watching him lead the small army away. The fighters followed the shepherd path south, towards the mountains and fjord. October 27th, year of our Lord 792 to Alcuin of York, venerable scholar, evangelist and ambassador of Rome to the barbarians. Teta, the unworthy and weak, sends to you, so loyal friend, across stormy seas and foreign lands, her warmest affection, knowing, as I do so well, that a friend is long to seek, hard to find, and difficult to keep. I acknowledge that reading the affirmations of your affection for me, as expressed in your thrillingly eloquent last letter, has filled my very inmost soul with a sweetness as of honey. Not to waste further words, not a day nor a night goes by without some remembrance of that long-ago summer in York with you, and with my departed brother, whom we both loved. And even though now we are so very distant and apart, my faithful Alcuin, yet you remain, as always, my tower of strength against enemies both without and within. Believe me, as a storm-tossed sailor longs for harbor, as an anxious mother watches by the shore for her son, do I long for the sight of you. But I am so oppressed by the tyranny of my sins, and so weighted down by my countless faults, that hope of salvation from impending danger cannot be mine, and I am plunged again and again into vexation. May I presume to ask your reverence's advice on a problem of great difficulty? I am struggling to find a fitting course of discipline for a very unusual nun, who has caused me great perplexity. Let me tell you briefly of her background and her continuing offense, so that you might offer your humble student a few words of advice, if you are willing to condescend. Her name is Leoba, of the town of Melrose, of common birth, quite plain of face, and 25 years of age. To the eye, there is nothing indicating her strangeness. Leoba was unwillingly brought here after being caught in a shocking act of deception. She had somehow managed to spend over 2 years living at the Iona monastery dressed as a monk and pretending to be a man. I am informed that she assumed a false voice at all times. She scraped a razor across cheeks and chin every day, as if to remove beard. I blush to mention how this impostor went so far in her unnatural scheme as to carry around a leather device to enable her to pass water while standing. Why did she join the monks at Iona rather than joining other girls and women at a convent? She claims that her only motivation was the fact that, since the Synod of Whitby, pilgrimage to foreign lands has been forbidden to English females. Despite that absolute injunction, backed by both ecclesiastical and royal authority, Leoba stubbornly wishes to see the Holy Land. She was just 2 weeks away from setting sail for Jerusalem, on a ship full of duped monks, when the deception was uncovered. An unmarried peasant woman from a town near Iona became pregnant, and rumors spread that she had been seduced by one of the monks. This peasant woman was confronted by Iona's abbot, brought to Iona, and the peasant woman was told to identify which of the monks had made her pregnant. The lying peasant woman pointed at the disguised Leoba. When Leoba was given the opportunity to respond to the allegation, she denied seducing the peasant woman, but refused, even then, to show that the accusation was physically impossible. Only when she was taken to the Miserium and the brown robe pulled away for punishment was her true sex discovered, to general astonishment. Although Leoba had joined the Benedictine order under false pretenses, she was held nevertheless to be bound by our rule and subject to monastic authority. So she was sent here, locked in a cage suitable for transporting a wild animal, with a short note from Bishop Higbold ordering me to teach her how to become a proper nun. Easier to tell than to do. She is frequently defiant towards my authority, has tried twice already to escape the convent, and refuses to promise not to try to escape again. There is another factor involved, which complicates my attempt to properly discipline this turbulent and difficult young woman. As a scholar, and as a visual artist, Leoba is greatly gifted by God. I am wary of the word genius, but I am forced, reluctantly, to so describe Leoba. Her script writing is not only highly accurate and beautiful, but also produced in very little time. Her work in the scriptorium is always a joy to behold. She blends the modern and the classic, the Roman and the Celtic, in ways that I had never before imagined. But you can see for yourself. I have enclosed a copy of Bede's ecclesiastical history that Leoba produced on her own. She made not only the golden script, but the goat skin pages themselves, and the painted leather cover, and the decorations on the spine. All wonderful, as you can see, though made by a rebellious and insolent Nun. Her first escape attempt consisted of trying to run across the sandbar connecting our island to the mainland, but her timing was poor as the tide washed over the sandbar before she had gone far, and she was forced to wade back to our island, where she was soon caught and brought back to the convent. Did she beg forgiveness? Acknowledge that she had done wrong? No, this crazed girl just snarled that Lindisfarne was a jail and that I was her jailer, as punishment for that escapade. And for her lack of humility and obedience, I invoked Chapter 24 of our rule and debarred her from eating at the common table. When she continued to flout my authority by tone of voice and expression of face, my next chastisement was to forbid her from the chapel. The next day, she made her second attempt to escape by taking a small boat and trying to row away, but she was seen, and the wind, with God's will, blew her back to shore and us. At that time, I ordered her punished as per Chapter 25. Let none of the other sisters stand near her or speak with her. Let her be always alone at her work, ignored by the entire community, and not be blessed by anyone passing by. Neither let blessings be put upon the food that is given her. Later, seeing that loneliness was causing Lioba's sadness, I followed chapter 27. Like a prudent physician, the abbess ought to use every opportunity to send discreet and trusted older nuns to secretly approach and console the excommunicated sister, in an attempt to induce her to repent and humbly beg forgiveness of the abbess. Lioba was secretly told that my arms and my heart are open for prodigal daughters, such as she. Like the good shepherd, who left the 99 sheep on the mountains, to go back and seek and find the one that had gone astray, and he was pleased to lay it on his sacred shoulders and carry it back to the flock. So I, most lowly Teta, tried to bring this lost nun home. But her sneering and contempt continued, and it was clear that if I did not act firmly, discipline among the others could decline. My next step was the sanction described in chapter 44. Let her, at the time that the word of God is celebrated in the chapel, lie stretched, face down, in silence before the door of the chapel, to be stepped over by sisters entering and leaving the chapel. Lioba has lain on the top of the stone steps to Cuthbert's chapel for many weeks now, 4 times a day. She is stepped over by each of the nuns going in and out of the chapel. Occasionally, a clumsy nun will kick Lioba, but she is stubborn. Lioba has snarled at me many times, in that insolent voice of hers, that ecclesiastical law does not allow me to punish nuns with death or to confine her indefinitely. With mockery, she says, sooner or later, Abbess Teta, you'll have to let me go. I could survive anything until then. When you expel me, I will be free to make my pilgrimage to the Holy Land, where the Virgin Mary has said I must go. Lioba claims, falsely no doubt, to see visions and hear divine voices. I am well aware of chapter XXX of our rule, of those who have often been corrected, but do not amend. If necessary, I will follow that rule with Lioba, but I am reluctant. Forced fasting, hair shirts, rod strikes to her shoulders. Oh, Alcuin, I hesitate. If I thought that physical pain would make Lioba into a proper nun, I would inflict it with tears of joy, but I doubt such a result. Lioba is so stubborn and bitter that I know that such chastisement would fail to reform her character, and it would certainly increase her fanatic lust to leave England. In your last wise letter, which I have often reread by bedside candle, you commended use of the rod in monastic discipline. Does the situation I have described change your opinion at all? Does it matter that the wrongdoer is highly unlikely to be reformed by physical pain? Does it matter that she came here not as a willing applicant, but as a caged transvestite? And finally, does it change your opinion to know she is an artist with God-given gifts? I fear that a wrong step on my part could deter her from using her talents on behalf of religion. I cannot decide what to do. I will continue her excommunication in its present form until I hear from you. Hopefully, that will be a matter of weeks, not months. Please tell me what to do. I will follow your advice, as I respect and revere your opinion above those of all other men. Alcuin, be my tower of both wisdom and strength. I am sure that it will greatly help towards the salvation of my soul if I follow your commands with my whole strength. Know, O holy oblate, that I am not sending you these gifts in the hope of receiving any earthly gift in return, but rather that I am on bended knee begging from you what is far more necessary, namely, that in these days of ubiquitous and sudden dangers, with scandals and corruption lurking on all sides, you would help me with your prayers by offering holy masses for the immortal soul of my brother, your dear friend, our Ethwald, who is now watching us with joy from Christ's right side. Farewell, Alcuin, my brother in the spirit, my beloved with pure and sincere affection, and may you continue to be strong and useful for our Lord. After 8 days of traveling and training, Halfdan's army moved down a frost-dusted mountain, about a half-day's march away from Ede. They stalked in a single line through the chilly wildland, following 2 scouts, the most skilled hunters in the group, who searched the ground ahead with skills earned from years of seeking deer, boar pigs, wolves, rabbits, and other wary game. The scouts never looked straight forward as they slipped through the trees and mountain rocks and grass clumps, but always moved their heads and eyes from one side to another in search of hidden foes. Halfdan had insisted that all of the traveling fighters often turned to look behind themselves. This was not necessary when hunting beasts, but, as mentioned earlier, King Lambi had taught Halfdan the importance of looking behind when hunting intelligent, armed foes. Everybody's weapons were wrapped in cloth to keep them from clinking or reflecting sunlight. Halfdan had traded his axe to Haki for a thick-bladed, two-handed sword. Haki had known the berserker from San who had owned the axe before Halfdan. They had fought against each other once at a drinking fest up north, then had traveled together. Haki was sad to hear that his friend and fellow berserker was dead, as he was one of the toughest men I've ever had the joy of swinging iron at. Haki was impressed with Halfdan's luck in killing the Berserk San man, and now fully accepted Halfdan's right to be war chief. Everybody's helmet and shield and clothing were camouflaged with hanging bits of dry moss or spruce branches or tufts of dry grass. The skin of almost everybody's face and hands was smeared with mud to cover the eye-catching whiteness. Halfdan did not really need to do this for the obvious reason, but he covered his skin with mud anyway. He would give his fighters no reason to complain that he asked them to do things he would not do himself. Soon before noon, a scout ran back to the main group and told Halfdan, "There are fighters ahead on a little outcrop of rock. They seem to be guarding slaves who are building something." "Building what?" "Seems to be a fort, making it out of pieces of rock." "Show me." Halfdan always marched at the front of the main group of fighters, followed by Atli, the second in command. Halfdan told Atli to get the men to rest and eat, while I go take a look. Atli passed the order back along the column, all the way back to Haki, the rear guard. The men quietly put down their bags and weapons and rested, sitting on rocks or stretching out on the hard, bumpy ground. Some drank water from their clay bottles, or picked the tiny blueberries growing all around, or leaned on their lumpy bags with closed eyes, trying for a nap. The scout led Halfdan forward through a patch of spruce forest to the edge of a sharp ridge that overlooked a deep and narrow valley. This scar in the mountain's face looked like it was from an avalanche. The other scout was waiting there. On the far side of the avalanche valley, the mountainside rose steeply to the left, towards a bare peak of gray rock. The 30 or so men over there were too far away to see clearly. When Halfdan held out a hand to judge distance, each of the men was as long as his thumbnail. Too far to see faces. More than half of them had shaven heads and faces, wearing ragged clothes. These men looked like slaves. Some of them were piling square pieces of rock onto a low wall. Other men carried rocks on shoulder packs up to the construction site from a place where a third group of slaves was using sledgehammers and spikes to break the mountain into building bricks. The slaves were under guard by a smaller number of men with helmets, carrying shields and spears. Their clothes looked like those popular with fighters, bright colors, puffy sleeves, and their hair and beards were long. One of the guards was sitting on a horse. "What are they doing up there?" whispered one of the scouts. "Looks like they are building a fort," said the other. "But why up here?" asked the first scout. Halfdan said, "Can you see something inside the fort?" The scouts looked closely. One said, "Yes, there is something inside it, sticking over the wall. Hard to tell what it is." "A pile of wood?" the other said. Halfdan said, "It looks like a pile of wood to me, too." "What for?" "It must be a signal beacon," Halfdan said. "This fort is placed where it blocks the easiest way down from the mountains to Eid. They are probably building other forts like this on the other routes down." "What is a beacon?" "The fighters in the fort can light the wood to send a signal. If the beacon is lit, folk in Eid will see smoke. The wood will have been soaked in a special oil to make a thick black smoke, or at night, they'll see the fire. That will tell them that trouble is on the way and give them time to get ready. So if we attack them, they'll light the beacon and warn Jal that we're coming." "Right," the other scout said, "but if we go around the fort and try to get down to Eid a different route, you said that there might be other forts with beacons in other places." Halfdan said they probably have arranged the beacon forts so that it's hard to get past them all without being seen by the eyes in one of them. "Then what do we do?" Halfdan said, "To get to Eid with surprise, we have to destroy one of these forts without giving the foe a chance to light the beacon fire. This one might be the easiest to take. For all we know, the others are completely built. Look at the walls on this one, still low enough to jump over. Let's go back to the others and make a plan. Early the next morning, Halfdan and his cousin Fisk and 2 other OS men were hiding in the broken and rocky ground just beneath the construction site, on a part of the slope away from the tents. Their bodies and clothes and swords were sprinkled with rock, dust to blend in with the gray mountainside. They were each armed with swords and wearing dusty helmets, no shields or body armor. They had spent the long, cold night slow sneaking towards the beacon fort, just as Halfdan had approached his uncle's house. The guards and slaves had set up tents to sleep near the workplace. Some of the guards had taken shifts to watch from a fort and make patrols, and both the slaves and the guards had sometimes left their tents to piss or shit on the rocks. But nobody had noticed the 4 almost motionless men inching closer and closer all night. The rest of Halfdan's warband had spent the night approaching the foe from a different direction. If all had gone according to Halfdan's orders, they would now be hiding a distance downhill from the half-built fort. They would be watching uphill, and at the first sign of action near the beacon, would burst out of hiding and charge up the open slope. Their first job was to kill the horseman if he tried to ride away to bring a warning to Ede. Their next job was to charge uphill to the beacon fort, hopefully in time to rescue Halfdan's group. Halfdan's advance group's task was to stop the beacon from being lit, to stop a warning signal reaching Ede. At sunrise, Halfdan and his 3 hidden companions watched the guards and slaves crawl out of their tents. After a breakfast of cold oatmeal for the slaves and meat and beer for the guards, the same sort of construction work as yesterday began. Slaves cut stone into blocks, and other slaves lifted the blocks to the half-built beacon fort, others putting the blocks into place. From his hiding place, Halfdan could hear some of the men talking. The slaves mostly worked in silence, with an occasional comment to another slave about the work. The guards with shields and spears often joked or gossiped to each other, or shouted threats at slaves. Listening, Halfdan learned that the slaves were to stay up here until the job was done, but that the guards would be going back to eat tomorrow, being replaced by other fighters. These guards were all from Ford. They had switched allegiance to King Jao recently, after their king Gunvald was killed. They complained about how the Ford men had to work up in the mountain with slaves, sleeping in fart-filled tents while the San fighters got better jobs near the town. Halfdan could not see inside the circular fort from his hiding place. The half-built walls were high enough to block any view of the inside. He thought that he had heard the voices of guards from there, but was not sure. It made sense to have guards by the beacon to light it in an emergency. But how many? Halfdan slowly moved his head around to check that the others were in position. Covered with rock dust, lying still in the shadows of avalanche chunks, they looked like natural parts of the mountain. Halfdan made eye contact with each one of them in turn. Good. None was asleep, then nodded and jumped to his feet and yanked out his sword. The other 3 young men also jumped to their feet and unsheathed their sharp iron. All of them ran, as quietly as they could, uphill towards the half-built fort. Overhead, 2 ravens flapped by, and a pale, low sun stared down. Nobody noticed them at first. The 4 OS men were running uphill in a group when Halfdan stepped into a pile of horse shit and slipped. He fell back and landed on his ass. He quickly scrambled back to his feet and sprinted after the others. But the younger men were faster and reached the low wall at the tip of the peak before him. Still, nobody had noticed them. Fisk was the first one to grab the top of the low wall and vault himself over. A moment later, there was a loud clash of metal hitting metal inside. A shaven-headed slave, carrying rock on his back, standing just outside the fort, heard the noise and looked around. He saw the next 2 OS fighters reach the fort wall and vault over it after Fisk. This slave stared at Halfdan running after them, but he did not yell or do anything. Halfdan reached the wall and jumped up. Unlike the others, he did not go right over it and inside. Halfdan hopped onto the half-built wall, crouching on top for a moment, looking inside. He saw the beacon, a man-high pile of oil-soaked wood, stuffed with bundles of birch bark, in the middle of the round room. A guard wearing body armor and a helmet, not carrying a weapon, was standing by the beacon with his back to Halfdan, banging a piece of iron onto a piece of flint. Orange sparks rained onto the pile of wood and birch bark. Halfdan next saw, closer to where he was crouching on the wall, two guards standing over three dust-gray men lying on the ground. The guards were stabbing down with spears. Fisk! Halfdan ducked his head just as a guard inside, whom Halfdan had not until then noticed, stabbed a spear at Halfdan's face. The iron tip scraped the top of his helmet. Halfdan whipped forward his free hand and grabbed the shaft of the foe's spear to yank the foe closer. In one motion, Halfdan dropped from the wall down into the fort and swung his sword. The good iron chopped through both the spear shaft and the guard's arm. The spear shaft and part of an arm fell to the ground. The guard took one swaying step backwards, eyes wide at the sight of the stump of his arm and its bright red fountain. From the side of his eye, Halfdan saw a weak smudge of smoke twisting up. Was the beacon lit? Halfdan hit the ground inside the fort, rolling, bouncing fast up to his feet. Warm blood from the collapsing, stump-clutching guard showered Halfdan's face, half blinding him. Wiping the wetness away with his free hand, he moved fast towards the two guards with shields and spears standing over Halfdan's fighters. Two of them were dead. The other, Fisk, was lying on his side, his body punctured by spear stabs, but still alive. When he saw Halfdan approaching, Fisk twisted his bleeding body around and grabbed the foot of the distracted guard standing over him. Fisk yanked the man's foot towards his own face and bit onto the pant cloth over the guard's ankle. Shouting in pain, the guard looked away from Halfdan and lifted his spear, its tip pointing down at Halfdan's cousin. The guard plunged the spear down into Fisk's neck. Even in death, Fisk's jaws stayed clamped tight on the ankle, and the guard had to spend a few moments kicking his leg free. The other guard, standing by the three dead OS men, lunged at Halfdan. Halfdan's sword blocked the spear. The guard pulled it back to stab at Halfdan again. Halfdan turned and ran towards the beacon and the unarmed guard standing there with flint and iron, his back to Halfdan, spraying sparks and blowing air onto it. Some of the birch bark smoldered. Orange lines of burning formed and grew on the dry, white bark. Faint gray smoke rose. The fire-starting guard was so intent on his work that he did not notice Halfdan running at him, until Halfdan's sword chopped into the side of his neck. The guard's head, still in a helmet, spun into the air, blood splashing underneath. The body crumpled to the ground, pumping blood onto Halfdan's boots. Halfdan jumped over the head and the body and swung his sword at the barely lit pile of tinder. The blade knocked the beacon apart. Bits of wood and birch bark flew in the air. The newborn fire was gone. Looking up, Halfdan saw a few wisps of gray smoke swirling up in the clear morning sky. Would anyone in Ede notice that? As he paused, distracted, the foe Halfdan had fled now moved to him, grunting as he shoved the spear into Halfdan's back. The iron tip poked through Halfdan's shirt and skin and muscles, pushing Halfdan sprawling forward. Halfdan tripped and fell to the rocky, bark-strewn ground, scraping his face on some gravel, terrible pain biting into his back. The guard jerked his spear tip out of Halfdan's flesh, raising the weapon over his head to stab down. Halfdan rolled fast to his right, so the iron missed his torso, but it hit his left hand, chopping off most of the smallest finger. Halfdan rolled onto his feet, sword in his right hand, blood pouring down from his four-fingered left hand. He charged at the man who had hurt him. His first sword swipe was blocked by the guard's shield edge, with a clash of iron hitting iron. Halfdan saw this foeman, looked to Halfdan's right. Without thinking, Halfdan jumped to his left. The killer of Fisk had moved up behind Halfdan, and almost succeeded in stabbing Halfdan's back with another spear tip. But he missed, and, unable to stop his lunge, ended up sticking his spear into the other guard's shield. Halfdan tried to attack both of them then, while they were tangled together, but he slipped on some blood and stumbled past them both, his sword swipe not hitting either of them. The guards yanked the shield and the spear apart. They turned together on Halfdan. Behind raised shields and spears, the two forward fighters moved on Halfdan with hard, scowling faces. Halfdan waited, feeling suddenly weak from blood loss. Intense, dizzying pain blazed from his back and left hand. He saw shadowy shapes, fluttering everywhere he looked. No, hallucinations. Weak from bleeding His legs went soft and crumpled under him. He dropped his sword as he fell back to sit hard on the ground, the impact jarring his spine and making his vision turn all black for a moment. But his sight cleared in a moment, to show the two foes moving together at him. Halfdan grabbed his sword grip, lifted it from the ground, but it fell from his trembling hand. Its blade landed on a rock, and the bang echoed in the rock walls. There were other noises Halfdan noticed coming from outside the fort. What was going on out there? The two foes now stood directly over Halfdan, who was dazed and unarmed. The one who had stabbed Halfdan's back and the one who had killed Fisk lifted their dripping weapons, about to stab down together at him. Time to die. Halfdan had no hope, until one of the guards dropped his shield and dropped his spear, clutching his hands onto an arrow in his chest. The guard's eyes widened, then emptied of life. He fell. A second mysterious arrow popped with a wet sound into the beard-covered throat of the last guard. He dropped his shield and his spear to grab the arrow shaft. Blood bubbles burst between his silver-ringed, gore-dripping fingers as he tugged uselessly at the slippery oakwood stick impaling his neck. He stumbled forward, silently opening his mouth, and collapsed down heavily onto Halfdan's legs. Halfdan tried to look around, but was too weak to move. So much pain. Shadowy shapes filled his sight. Familiar shapes of flapping black wings everywhere. Now we must tell of the rest of the battle. Hiding in a clump of trees downhill from the half-built fort, holding a bow with a stringed arrow, Atli had waited for Halfdan and his advance group to jump out of their hiding places to signal the start of the attack. Crouched beside him, Haki said, "There they go. Finally." Haki laughed when he saw Halfdan slip on horse shit and briefly fall down. Atli shouted, "Go." His group attacked uphill. The slaves and guard around the construction site were startled to hear the clash of the advance group vaulting into the fort and meeting the 4 guards inside, followed soon by the sounds and sight of 19 fighters bursting together from the trees downhill, some of them yelling and whooping as they ran with raised weapons. Unlike the advance group, these OS men were fully armed, with helmets and shields. Some carried spears, some swords. Haki and his cousin Sten were the only ones without shields, both carrying 2-handed war axes. Only Atli had a bow. His task was to make sure that the guard on the horse did not ride away, to carry news of the attack to Eid. But Atli's arrows missed. He had never shot a man before, and the horseman rode fast away. "Odin's prick," Atli said. When the fleeing horseman was out of arrow range, Atli ran uphill after Haki and the others. The slaves dropped their tools and pieces of rock, scrambling to get out of the way. When the 19 OS men, led by Haki and Sten, both roaring, reached the 12 forward fighters, a fierce battle began. Haki killed his first man with an axe swing under the guard's shield, chopping one leg right off and slicing deep into the other. Haki yanked his axe back and raised his brown-bearded face to roar at the sky. No smoke was rising from the beacon yet. Atli had to get to the beacon fort fast to help Halfdan's advance group if they were in trouble. Stopping to shoot an arrow now and then, Atli hurried uphill. Despite the advantage of fighting from higher ground, the outnumbered, surprised guards soon lost courage. Some started to run away to either side of the fighting and were chased and killed or hit in the back by one of Atli's arrows. Those who did not try to run either died fighting or surrendered. Haki, grinning savagely, his eyes wide and glazed with the madness of a berserker, killed those who surrendered. He also smashed his axe onto the heads of hurt foes lying on the rocks. As battle turned to massacre, Atli hurried uphill towards the fort, arrow held to bowstring. He could not see inside, and no sounds came from inside the low walls. Did Halfdan's group need help? Was Atli too late? He ran to the narrow door of the half-built, roofless building and stepped inside, arrow ready to shoot. Then he stopped, very surprised. Atli blurted to a young woman crouched by a body on the blood-puddled, body-strewn floor. "What in the name of Odin is going on?" "How did?" Interrupting him, Ingvild said, "Halfdan is badly hurt. Where are the bandages?" Halfdan lay on his side, eyes closed, not moving. A red stain had spread across most of his back, and Ingvild was tying a string around Halfdan's finger stump to stop the bleeding. Nobody else in the fort was alive. Atli saw a quiver of arrows on Ingvild's shoulder and a bow on the ground beside her. Two of the dead guards each had an arrow sticking from chest or throat. Who shot those two? Ingvild said, Me. Where are the bandages? I don't know. I don't think we have any. But you're that woman we left behind in OS. How did you get here? No bandages at a battle? Fools! Ingvild took out the little knife on her belt and poked its tip through the cloth of her shirt sleeve. She started cutting off a wide strip of linen. Atli said, But how did you get here? I followed you, obviously, she said. Now, are you going to help me heal your war chief? Or are you going to just stand there asking questions as he bleeds to death? Atli put down his bow and his arrows and tried to help. When Halfdan regained consciousness, he saw Ingvild. She crouched in front of him, looking closely down at him. She said, How do you feel? He weakly whispered. Why are you here? I followed you, thinking you might need help. And I was right. Too dangerous. Dangerous for who? She held up a small, curled, brown and red thing for him to see. Remember this? Halfdan couldn't focus his eyes enough to see it well. What is it? Your finger. Halfdan looked at the fingerpiece, then at his left hand, which was covered with tightly wrapped cloth. He noticed that the cloth was the same kind as Ingvild's now sleeveless shirt. Ingvild said, But I'm more worried about your back. The spear almost made it into your lungs. Does it hurt? Yes. You're going to need a lot of rest. No, he said. He saw Atli standing behind Ingvild. Halfdan said, Atli, what happened? Atli said, The good news is that we won the battle. And the bad? The horseman got away. As soon as he gets to Eid, Njal will know we're here. Halfdan scowled. Atli said, There's more bad news. A lot of our men are hurt, and Vanu is hurt badly. Stabbed in the belly. Looks like he will die. Halfdan looked at Ingvild. She said, While you were passed out, I went out and did what I could to heal the others. Vanu is probably not going to live. We'll know in a while. Fisk is dead, Halfdan said, looking over at his cousin's body. I'm sorry, Ingvild said. Halfdan said to Atli, Did you question the prisoners? There are none. Haki went berserk, and I couldn't control him. His cousin went berserk too. They killed everyone who surrendered, and they killed all of the hurt ones too. Why? Because that's the kind of thing berserkers do. Haki and Sten fought bravely and skillfully, but out of control. So King Njal will soon know we're coming, and we have no prisoners to ask about the situation in Eid. No, Halfdan said, Tor's flea-bitten balls. What about the slaves? They might know something. Don't tell me that Haki killed all of the slaves too. No, he didn't kill any of them, but they all ran away. All. Ingvild said to Halfdan, Be calm. If you move around too much, the bleeding will start again. Halfdan said to Atli, Get the men ready to leave. Atli nodded and went back outside. You're too hurt to be moved, Ingvild said. The healing is going to take time. We don't have time. Halfdan said, Help me to stand up. Rest. I'll rest when we've taken Eid. If you live that long. Help me stand up. Scowling, Ingvild put one of his arms around her shoulders and helped him to stand up. He swayed at first, unsteady on his feet, until Ingvild handed him a spear to use as a crutch. Terrible pain. He asked, Why did you follow us? To help you. If you get killed, there's less chance of the men who killed my friends meeting justice. She paused, then said, And if you were killed, I'd be a little bit sad for a while. Thanks. Leaning on the spear shaft, Halfdan started shuffling towards the doorway to outside. She said, I hope you aren't going to ask me to stay behind again. I won't. I want you to be safe. Stay up here. I'll send someone to get you after the fighting in Eid is done. If you leave without me, I'll just follow you down. Fine, come. But stay out of fighting. Your only job is healing. Someone else can rescue me next time. She helped him stagger outside. Weak sunlight and cool wind. The mountainside was strewn with red-soaked bodies. A dozen or so white-shouldered crows and a pair of big, all-black ravens were busy. The birds, beloved by poets, symbols of Odin, hopped among the rocks, screeching, flapping, ripping with sharp mouths at the food. After 8 days of traveling and training, Halfdan's army moved down a frost-dusted mountain, about a half-day's march away from Eid. They stalked in a single line through the chilly wildland, following two scouts, the most skilled hunters in the group, who searched the ground ahead with skills earned from years of seeking deer, boar pigs, wolves, rabbits, and other wary game. The scouts never looked straight forward as they slipped through the trees and mountain rocks and grass clumps, but always moved their heads and eyes from one side to another in search of hidden foes. Halfdan had insisted that all of the traveling fighters often turned to look behind themselves. This was not necessary when hunting beasts, but as mentioned earlier, King Lambie had taught Halfdan the importance of looking behind when hunting intelligent, armed foes. Everybody's weapons were wrapped in cloth to keep them from clinking or reflecting sunlight. Halfdan had traded his axe to Haki for a thick-bladed, two-handed sword. Haki had known the berserker from San who had owned the axe before Halfdan. They had fought against each other once at a drinking fest up north, then had traveled together. Haki was sad to hear that his friend and fellow berserker was dead, as he was one of the toughest men I've ever had the joy of swinging iron at. Haki was impressed with Halfdan's luck in killing the Berserk San man, and now fully accepted Halfdan's right to be war chief. Everybody's helmet and shield and clothing were camouflaged with hanging bits of dry moss or spruce branches or tufts of dry grass. The skin of almost everybody's face and hands was smeared with mud to cover the eye-catching whiteness. Halfdan did not really need to do this, for the obvious reason, but he covered his skin with mud anyway. He would give his fighters no reason to complain that he asked them to do things he would not do himself. Soon before noon, a scout ran back to the main group and told Halfdan, "There are fighters ahead on a little outcrop of rock. They seem to be guarding slaves who are building something." "Building what?" "Seems to be a fort, making it out of pieces of rock." "Show me." Halfdan always marched at the front of the main group of fighters, followed by Atli, the second in command. Halfdan told Atli to get the men to rest and eat, while I go take a look. Atli passed the order back along the column, all the way back to Haki, the rear guard. The men quietly put down their bags and weapons and rested, sitting on rocks or stretching out on the hard, bumpy ground. Some drank water from their clay bottles or picked the tiny blueberries growing all around or leaned on their lumpy bags with closed eyes, trying for a nap. The scout led Halfdan forward through a patch of spruce forest to the edge of a sharp ridge that overlooked a deep and narrow valley. This scar in the mountain's face looked like it was from an avalanche. The other scout was waiting there. On the far side of the avalanche valley, the mountainside rose steeply to the left, towards a bare peak of gray rock. The 30 or so men over there were too far away to see clearly. When Halfdan held out a hand to judge distance, each of the men was as long as his thumbnail. Too far to see faces. More than half of them had shaven heads and faces, wearing ragged clothes. These men looked like slaves. Some of them were piling square pieces of rock onto a low wall. Other men carried rocks on shoulder packs up to the construction site from a place where a third group of slaves was using sledgehammers and spikes to break the mountain into building bricks. The slaves were under guard by a smaller number of men with helmets, carrying shields and spears. Their clothes looked like those popular with fighters, bright colors, puffy sleeves, and their hair and beards were long. One of the guards was sitting on a horse. "What are they doing up there?" whispered one of the scouts. "Looks like they are building a fort," said the other. "But why up here?" asked the first scout. Halfdan said, "Can you see something inside the fort?" The scouts looked closely. One said, "Yes, there's something inside it sticking over the wall. Hard to tell what it is." "A pile of wood?" the other said. Halfdan said, "It looks like a pile of wood to me too." "What for?" "It must be a signal beacon," Halfdan said. "This fort is placed where it blocks the easiest way down from the mountains to Eid. They are probably building other forts like this on the other routes down." "What is a beacon?" "The fighters in the fort can light the wood to send a signal. If the beacon is lit, folk in Eid will see smoke. The wood will have been soaked in a special oil to make a thick black smoke, or at night, they'll see the fire. That will tell them that trouble is on the way and give them time to get ready. So if we attack them, they'll light the beacon and warn Jal that we're coming." "Right," the other scout said, "but if we go around the fort and try to get down to Eid a different route, you said that there might be other forts with beacons in other places." Halfdan said they probably have arranged the beacon forts so that it's hard to get past them all without being seen by the eyes in one of them. Then what do we do? Halfdan said, to get to Eid with surprise, we have to destroy one of these forts without giving the foe a chance to light the beacon fire. This one might be the easiest to take. For all we know, the others are completely built. Look at the walls on this one, still low enough to jump over. Let's go back to the others and make a plan. Early the next morning, Halfdan and his cousin Fisk and 2 other OS men were hiding in the broken and rocky ground just beneath the construction site, on a part of the slope away from the tents. Their bodies and clothes and swords were sprinkled with rock, dust to blend in with the gray mountainside. They were each armed with swords and wearing dusty helmets, no shields or body armor. They had spent the long, cold night slow sneaking towards the beacon fort, just as Halfdan had approached his uncle's house. The guards and slaves had set up tents to sleep near the workplace. Some of the guards had taken shifts to watch from the fort and make patrols, and both the slaves and the guards had sometimes left their tents to piss or shit on the rocks. But nobody had noticed the 4 almost motionless men inching closer and closer all night. The rest of Halfdan's warband had spent the night approaching the foe from a different direction. If all had gone according to Halfdan's orders, they would now be hiding a distance downhill from the half-built fort. They would be watching uphill, and at the first sign of action near the beacon, would burst out of hiding and charge up the open slope. Their first job was to kill the horseman if he tried to ride away to bring a warning to Eid. Their next job was to charge uphill to the beacon fort, hopefully in time to rescue Halfdan's group. Halfdan's advance group's task was to stop the beacon from being lit, to stop a warning signal reaching Eid. At sunrise, Halfdan and his 3 hidden companions watched the guards and slaves crawl out of their tents. After a breakfast of cold oatmeal for the slaves and meat and beer for the guards, the same sort of construction work as yesterday began. Slaves cut stone into blocks, and other slaves lifted the blocks to the half-built beacon fort, others putting the blocks into place. From his hiding place, Halfdan could hear some of the men talking. The slaves mostly worked in silence, with an occasional comment to another slave about the work. The guards with shields and spears often joked or gossiped to each other or shouted threats at slaves. Listening, Halfdan learned that the slaves were to stay up here until the job was done, but that the guards would be going back to Eid tomorrow, being replaced by other fighters. These guards were all from Ford. They had switched allegiance to King Zhao recently, after their king Gunvald was killed. They complained about how the Ford men had to work up in a mountain with slaves, sleeping in fart-filled tents while the San fighters got better jobs near the town. Halfdan could not see inside the circular fort from his hiding place. The half-built walls were high enough to block any view of the inside. He thought that he had heard the voices of guards from there, but was not sure. It made sense to have guards by the beacon to light it in an emergency, but how many? Halfdan slowly moved his head around to check that the others were in position. Covered with rock dust, lying still in the shadows of avalanche chunks, they looked like natural parts of the mountain. Halfdan made eye contact with each one of them in turn. Good. None was asleep, then nodded and jumped to his feet and yanked out his sword. The other 3 young men also jumped to their feet and unsheathed their sharp iron. All of them ran, as quietly as they could, uphill towards the half-built fort. Overhead, 2 ravens flapped by, and a pale, low sun stared down. Nobody noticed them at first. The 4 OS men were running uphill in a group when Halfdan stepped into a pile of horse shit and slipped. He fell back and landed on his ass. He quickly scrambled back to his feet and sprinted after the others. But the younger men were faster and reached the low wall at the tip of the peak before him. Still, nobody had noticed them. Fisk was the first one to grab the top of the low wall and vault himself over. A moment later, there was a loud clash of metal hitting metal inside. A shaven-headed slave, carrying rock on his back, standing just outside the fort, heard the noise and looked around. He saw the next 2 OS fighters reach the fort wall and vault over it after Fisk. This slave stared at Halfdan running after them, but he did not yell or do anything. Halfdan reached the wall and jumped up. Unlike the others, he did not go right over it and inside. Halfdan hopped onto the half-built wall, crouching on top for a moment, looking inside. He saw the beacon, a man-high pile of oil-soaked wood, stuffed with bundles of birch bark, in the middle of the round room. A guard wearing body armor and a helmet, not carrying a weapon, was standing by the beacon with his back to Halfdan, banging a piece of iron onto a piece of flint. Orange sparks rained onto the pile of wood and birch bark. Halfdan next saw, closer to where he was crouching on the wall, 2 guards standing over 3 dusk-gray men lying on the ground. The guards were stabbing down with spears. Fisk! Halfdan ducked his head just as a guard inside, whom Halfdan had not until then noticed, stabbed a spear at Halfdan's face. The iron tip scraped the top of his helmet. Halfdan whipped forward his free hand and grabbed the shaft of the foe's spear to yank the foe closer. In one motion, Halfdan dropped from the wall down into the fort and swung his sword. The good iron chopped through both the spear shaft and the guard's arm. The spear shaft and part of an arm fell to the ground. The guard took one swaying step backwards, eyes wide at the sight of the stump of his arm and its bright red fountain. From the side of his eye, Halfdan saw a weak smudge of smoke twisting up. Was the beacon lit? Halfdan hit the ground inside the fort, rolling, bouncing fast up to his feet. Warm blood from the collapsing, stump-clutching guard showered Halfdan's face, half blinding him. Wiping the wetness away with his free hand, he moved fast towards the 2 guards with shields and spears standing over Halfdan's fighters. 2 of them were dead. The other, Fisk, was lying on his side, his body punctured by spear stabs, but still alive. When he saw Halfdan approaching, Fisk twisted his bleeding body around and grabbed the foot of the distracted guard standing over him. Fisk yanked the man's foot towards his own face and bit onto the pant cloth over the guard's ankle. Shouting in pain, the guard looked away from Halfdan and lifted his spear, its tip pointing down at Halfdan's cousin. The guard plunged the spear down into Fisk's neck. Even in death, Fisk's jaws stayed clamped tight on the ankle, and the guard had to spend a few moments kicking his leg free. The other guard, standing by the 3 dead OS men, lunged at Halfdan. Halfdan's sword blocked the spear. The guard pulled it back to stab at Halfdan again. Halfdan turned and ran towards the beacon and the unarmed guard standing there with flint and iron, his back to Halfdan, spraying sparks and blowing air onto it. Some of the birch bark smoldered. Orange lines of burning formed and grew on the dry, white bark. Faint gray smoke rose. The fire-starting guard was so intent on his work that he did not notice Halfdan running at him, until Halfdan's sword chopped into the side of his neck. The guard's head, still in a helmet, spun into the air, blood splashing underneath. The body crumpled to the ground, pumping blood onto Halfdan's boots. Halfdan jumped over the head and the body and swung his sword at the barely lit pile of tinder. The blade knocked the beacon apart. Bits of wood and birch bark flew in the air. The newborn fire was gone. Looking up, Halfdan saw a few wisps of gray smoke swirling up in the clear morning sky. Would anyone in Ede notice that? As he paused, distracted, the foe Halfdan had fled now moved to him, grunting as he shoved the spear into Halfdan's back. The iron tip poked through Halfdan's shirt and skin and muscles, pushing Halfdan sprawling forward. Halfdan tripped and fell to the rocky, bark-strewn ground, scraping his face on some gravel, terrible pain biting into his back. The guard jerked his spear tip out of Halfdan's flesh, raising the weapon over his head to stab down. Halfdan rolled fast to his right, so the iron missed his torso, but it hit his left hand, chopping off most of the smallest finger. Halfdan rolled onto his feet, sword in his right hand, blood pouring down from his 4-fingered left hand. He charged at the man who had hurt him. His first sword swipe was blocked by the guard's shield edge, with a clash of iron hitting iron. Halfdan saw this foeman look to Halfdan's right. Without thinking, Halfdan jumped to his left. The killer of Fisk had moved up behind Halfdan and almost succeeded in stabbing Halfdan's back with another spear tip. But he missed and, unable to stop his lunge, ended up sticking his spear into the other guard's shield. Halfdan tried to attack both of them then, while they were tangled together, but he slipped on some blood and stumbled past them both, his sword swipe not hitting either of them. The guards yanked the shield and the spear apart. They turned together on Halfdan. Behind raised shields and spears, the 2 forward fighters moved on Halfdan with hard, scowling faces. Halfdan waited, feeling suddenly weak from blood loss. Intense, dizzying pain blazed from his back and left hand. He saw shadowy shapes, fluttering everywhere he looked. No, hallucinations. Weak from bleeding, his legs went soft and crumpled under him. He dropped his sword as he fell back to sit hard on the ground, the impact jarring his spine and making his vision turn all black for a moment. But his sight cleared in a moment, to show the two foes moving together at him. Halfdan grabbed his sword grip, lifted it from the ground, but it fell from his trembling hand. Its blade landed on a rock and a bang, echoed in the rock walls. There were other noises Halfdan noticed coming from outside the fort. What was going on out there? The two foes now stood directly over Halfdan, who was dazed and unarmed. The one who had stabbed Halfdan's back and the one who had killed Fisk lifted their dripping weapons, about to stab down together at him. Time to die. Halfdan had no hope until one of the guards dropped his shield and dropped his spear, clutching his hands onto an arrow in his chest. The guard's eyes widened, then emptied of life. He fell. A second mysterious arrow popped with a wet sound into the beard-covered throat of the last guard. He dropped his shield and a spear to grab the arrow shaft. Blood bubbles burst between his silver-ringed, gore-dripping fingers as he tugged uselessly at the slippery oakwood stick impaling his neck. He stumbled forward, silently opening his mouth, and collapsed down heavily onto Halfdan's legs. Halfdan tried to look around, but was too weak to move. So much pain. Shadowy shapes filled his sight. Familiar shapes of flapping black wings everywhere. Now we must tell of the rest of the battle. Hiding in a clump of trees downhill from the half-built fort, holding a bow with a stringed arrow, Atli had waited for Halfdan and his advance group to jump out of their hiding places to signal the start of the attack. Crouched beside him, Haki said, "There they go. Finally." Haki laughed when he saw Halfdan slip on horse shit and briefly fall down. Atli shouted, "Go." His group attacked uphill. The slaves and guards around the construction site were startled to hear the clash of the advance group, vaulting into the fort and meeting the 4 guards inside, followed soon by the sounds and sight of 19 fighters bursting together from the trees downhill, some of them yelling and whooping as they ran with raised weapons. Unlike the advance group, these OS men were fully armed, with helmets and shields. Some carried spears, some swords. Haki and his cousin Sten were the only ones without shields, both carrying 2-handed war axes. Only Atli had a bow. His task was to make sure that the guard on the horse did not ride away, to carry news of the attack to Ede. But Atli's arrows missed. He had never shot a man before, and the horseman rode fast away. Odin's prick, Atli said. When the fleeing horseman was out of arrow range, Atli ran uphill after Haki and the others. The slaves dropped their tools and pieces of rock, scrambling to get out of the way. When the 19 OS men, led by Haki and Sten, both roaring, reached the 12 forward fighters, a fierce battle began. Haki killed his first man with an axe swing under the guard's shield, chopping one leg right off and slicing deep into the other. Haki yanked his axe back and raised his brown-bearded face to roar at the sky. No smoke was rising from the beacon yet. Atli had to get to the beacon fort fast to help Halfdan's advance group if they were in trouble. Stopping to shoot an arrow now and then, Atli hurried uphill. Despite the advantage of fighting from higher ground, the outnumbered, surprised guards soon lost courage. Some started to run away to either side of the fighting and were chased and killed or hit in the back by one of Atli's arrows. Those who did not try to run either died fighting or surrendered. Haki, grinning savagely, his eyes wide and glazed with the madness of a berserker, killed those who surrendered. He also smashed his axe onto the heads of hurt foes lying on the rocks. As battle turned to massacre, Atli hurried uphill towards the fort, arrow held to bowstring. He could not see inside, and no sounds came from inside the low walls. Did Halfdan's group need help? Was Atli too late? He ran to the narrow door of the half-built, roofless building and stepped inside, arrow ready to shoot. Then he stopped, very surprised. Atli blurted to a young woman crouched by a body on the blood-puddled, body-strewn floor, "What in the name of Odin is going on? How did—" Interrupting him, Ingvild said, Halfdan is badly hurt. Where are the bandages? Halfdan lay on his side, eyes closed, not moving. A red stain had spread across most of his back, and Ingvild was tying a string around Halfdan's finger stump to stop the bleeding. Nobody else in the fort was alive. Atli saw a quiver of arrows on Ingvild's shoulder and a bow on the ground beside her. Two of the dead guards each had an arrow sticking from chest or throat. Who shot those two? Ingvild said, Me. Where are the bandages? I don't know. I don't think we have any. But you're that woman we left behind in OS. How did you get here? No bandages at a battle? Fools. Ingvild took out the little knife on her belt and poked its tip through the cloth of her shirt sleeve. She started cutting off a wide strip of linen. Atli said, But how did you get here? I followed you, obviously, she said. Now, are you going to help me heal your war chief? Or are you going to just stand there asking questions as he bleeds to death? Atli put down his bow and his arrows and tried to help. When Halfdan regained consciousness, he saw Ingvild. She crouched in front of him, looking closely down at him. She said, How do you feel? He weakly whispered. Why are you here? I followed you, thinking you might need help. And I was right. Too dangerous. Dangerous for who? She held up a small, curled, brown and red thing for him to see. Remember this? Halfdan couldn't focus his eyes enough to see it well. What is it? Your finger. Halfdan looked at the fingerpiece, then at his left hand, which was covered with tightly wrapped cloth. He noticed that the cloth was the same kind as Ingvild's now sleeveless shirt. Ingvild said, But I'm more worried about your back. The spear almost made it into your lungs. Does it hurt? Yes. You're going to need a lot of rest. No, he said. He saw Atli standing behind Ingvild. Halfdan said, Atli, what happened? Atli said, The good news is that we won the battle. And the bad. The horseman got away. As soon as he gets to Eid, Jal will know we're here. Halfdan scowled. Atli said, There is more bad news. A lot of our men are hurt, and Vanu is hurt badly. Stabbed in the belly. Looks like he will die. Halfdan looked at Ingvild. She said, While you were passed out, I went out and did what I could to heal the others. Vanu is probably not going to live. We'll know in a while. Fisk is dead, Halfdan said, looking over at his cousin's body. I'm sorry, Ingvild said. Halfdan said to Atli, Did you question the prisoners? There are none. Haki went berserk, and I couldn't control him. His cousin went berserk too. They killed everyone who surrendered. And they killed all of the hurt ones too. Why? Because that's the kind of thing berserkers do. Haki and Sten fought bravely and skillfully, but out of control. So King Jal will soon know we're coming, and we have no prisoners to ask about the situation in Eid. No, Halfdan said, Tor's flea-bitten balls. What about the slaves? They might know something. Don't tell me that Haki killed all of the slaves too. No, he didn't kill any of them, but they all ran away. All. Ingvild said to Halfdan, Be calm. If you move around too much, the bleeding will start again. Halfdan said to Atli, Get the men ready to leave. Atli nodded and went back outside. You're too hurt to be moved, Ingvild said. The healing is going to take time. We don't have time, Halfdan said. Help me to stand up. Rest. I'll rest when we've taken Eid. If you live that long, help me stand up. Scowling, Ingvild put one of his arms around her shoulders and helped him to stand up. He swayed at first, unsteady on his feet, until Ingvild handed him a spear to use as a crutch. Terrible pain. He asked, Why did you follow us? To help you. If you get killed, there's less chance of the men who kill my friends meeting justice. She paused, then said, And if you were killed, I'd be a little bit sad for a while. Thanks. Leaning on the spear shaft, Halfdan started shuffling towards the doorway to outside. She said, I hope you aren't going to ask me to stay behind again. I won't. I want you to be safe. Stay up here. I'll send someone to get you after the fighting in Eid is done. If you leave without me, I'll just follow you down. Fine, Kulme. But stay out of fighting. Your only job is healing. Someone else can rescue me next time. She helped him stagger outside. Weak sunlight and cool wind. The mountainside was strewn with red-soaked bodies. A dozen or so white-shouldered crows and a pair of big, all-black ravens were busy. The birds, beloved by poets, symbols of Odin, hopped among the rocks, screeching, flapping, ripping with sharp mouths at the food. December 7th, year of our Lord 792, to my reverend handmaid of Christ, the Abbess Tetta, in the bond of spiritual love and with a holy and chaste kiss of affection. Alcuin, the least of the servants of God, prays that our Lord shall in this life guard and prosper you in health and every holy virtue, and shall after death glorify and reward you in future blessedness among shining cohorts of angels. I apologize for taking so long to write back to you. Let me assure you, my precious friend, that when I saw the copy of ecclesiastical history you sent me, I gave voluble thanks to God for having such a friend in my journeys in these distant parts. One who helps me so generously with material things, and supports me spiritually with her prayers and the divine consolation of her gentle affection. With my hands upraised to heaven, I beg the Supreme Majesty to repay you with eternal life on high. I pray to Almighty God, the rewarder of all good works, that he will repay you in the heavenly mansions and eternal tabernacles, and in the choir of the blessed angels and archangels for all the kindnesses you have shown me, for the solace of books with which you have relieved my distress, and, above all, for your friendship. The book is truly beautiful to look at and to touch. You have not exaggerated Lioba's technical skill, if this example is typical of her other work. Yet, regardless of her talent, my admonitions regarding discipline fully apply. She must not be simply expelled from Lindisfarne, as she so clearly desires, to set an example for the rest of your flock, and for her sake, Lioba must suffer harsh discipline. For disobedience is the blackest of all monastic crime. I agree that the traditional tools in these situations would likely not be effective with such a strange personality. But I have an intuition that another type of punishment might work well. Keep her locked in a small, lightless room, and let nobody talk to her for any reason or even show a face to her. Her meals and water are to be put into the room when she is asleep through a door that admits no light. No one is to speak close enough to the room for Lioba to hear. Let her feel forgotten. Keep Lioba in silence and loneliness and darkness until she submits fully to your sacred authority. So I advise. My friend, I think of your love with such sweet memories, tender abbess, that I long for the time, even if it should be as I breathe my last, when I may be able to caress your innocence with my affection. If only it were granted to me, as it was to Habakkuk, to be transported to you across such a vast distance at the speed of a wish, how I would sink into your purest embrace. Oh, my Tetta, how much would I chastely cover, with tightly pressed lips, not only your face, but your every soft finger and pale toe, not once but many a time, in respect and friendship. Our wish is that it may be well with you till the end of your days in Christ. After the battle the night after the battle of the beacon, Halfdan's army reached the bottom of the mountains to find an orange glow filling the sky ahead. He was on fire. Flames roared and swirled everywhere in the wood-built town, along the two main north-south streets and each of the smaller east-west streets, from the wooden docks on the shore of the fjord to the wooden wall that surrounded the town. Flames danced on trader stalls in the market, on the big, fancy, expensive homes of nobles in the center of town, and on the smaller homes on the outskirts. Flames roared almost everywhere, except on the empty space where the hall had stood, sending a thick, gray column of smoke twisting up to the night clouds. When Halfdan's army arrived, there were no foes around. Nobody wearing a helmet, nobody carrying a shield, just a crowd of civilians, their stunned faces red from the heat. The blazing town was surrounded at a safe distance by most of the folk of Ede, watching flames eat their homes. One of them told Halfdan what had happened. King Jal had killed King Gunvald to end the sharing of political power. King Jal's men had battled in the streets of Ede against the Fordmen. King Jal's fighters had won. Most of the defeated, kingless, lootless fighters had sailed back to Ford. But some of them had sold their loyalty to King Jal for silver, and these side-switchers had been sent to build and guard the mountain beacon forts. It was true that King Jal had found the skull of King Lambie buried in the ashes of his hall. King Jal had tied a piece of string through the skull's eye holes, to dangle it from his horse's saddle as a foul trophy. As he was riding around the town, the head bouncing at his side, a miracle happened. A snake had slithered across the road in front of King Jal, frightening his horse and making the beast rear up onto its hind legs. King Lamby's fire-black skull had swung up on the string, and its gaping, fleshless mouth hit King Jal's left leg, one sharp tooth poking through his wool pants, scratching the skin. A small scratch, which King Jal ignored, until it became infected. When folks saw King Jal walk, they noticed his limp. Word spread that the flesh around the tooth scrape was growing more and more swollen, and that the disease demons now living inside his leg were pouring out a stream of white pus, and that the flesh around the hurt was rotting. King Jal ordered his personal healer, a San man who had accompanied the invading army, to heal him. The healer tried chanted rituals, bleeding, the sacrifice of beasts, and magic rune carving. Nothing worked. The infection from King Lamby's death bite only got worse. When the San healer admitted that he had failed, King Jal showed his cruelty by ordering a San fighter to poke out the healer's eyes, a message about the cost of failure. King Jal had then sent horsemen to many of the nearby Fjordain towns, with orders to bring every healer they found back to Eid, willingly or not. 5 local healers had been brought to Eid from various places. By then, the pus had been green and smelly, and the pain in the leg had felt to King Jal like torture. None of the conscripted healers had healed him. Calling them all traitors, King Jal had ordered their eyes poked out too. Standing by Halfdan, Ingvild's gray-blue eyes went wide with fear. She blurted out, "Was one of the healers named Siv? Brought here from Lone?" "I don't know," the Eid man said. "What happened to the healers after they were blinded?" "Some of them died. Maybe all of them did. I don't know." Over the roaring of the nearby flames, Ingvild wailed, "Mother, no." Halfdan put a hand on her shoulder, saying, "Stay calm. Siv probably wasn't one of the healers brought here." To the Eid man, Halfdan said, "Go on." 3 days ago, King Jal had been carried on a stretcher to the docks and put onto a ship to take him to San. Some Eid folk had guessed that he went back to his own kingdom to find a healer who could be trusted. Others said that King Jal wanted to die at home, where his burial mound would be raised. King Jal left his eldest son, called Egil the Beard Puller, behind in Eid to rule the stolen kingdom. "We were glad to see Jal leave, but Egil was not an improvement," the Eid man said. "Egil is as cruel as his father, and as lustful. All of us who are parents were terrified that he would notice one of our daughters, the beast." Many Fordmen who had switched loyalty to the famous and experienced king of San found it hard to take orders from his arrogant, over-aggressive, 24-year-old son. The fighters from San, who had known Egil for much longer, also had little respect for him. The panicked horsemen from the mountain rode into Eid this afternoon, with an exaggerated story about a large group of fighters who had attacked the fort guards and were on their way to Eid. Egil had commanded his father's fighters, there were almost 200 of them in Eid, to take defensive positions on the town wall. They refused, not knowing that the approaching army was only 19 men and a healer woman. Nobody wanted to risk a battle. "Egil has bad luck," one San man had said. "We agreed to fight for Njal, not his brat." Another had grumbled. "We have enough loot. It's time to go home." Egil had had no choice but to follow the will of his fighters. The defeatist foe had quickly loaded their warships with boxes and bags of loot stolen from Eid and other Fjordain towns. With torches and poured oil, they had set fire to each building in Eid and to each ship left behind and to the docks. Then they had sailed away, west along the fjord towards the endless ocean. Atli said to Halfdan, "So there is now no government here. What about us?" Halfdan said. Atli nodded. While waiting for the fire to burn out, Halfdan told his fighters to help the crowd of Eid folk. It was fall, and the radiant heat of the burning town hid the air's chill. When the fire died, folk without shelter would get very cold. Messengers were sent to the farmhouses outside the town walls that had been spared the fire, asking for donations of clothes and food and shelter-making materials. They were also asked to share their homes for a few days with the homeless children and old folk. Ingvild's only concern was for her mother. She went among the crowd of Eid folk describing SIV and asking if anyone had seen her. One woman said that SIV had been one of the healers brought to Eid, but this Eid woman did not know where SIV was now, or if she's even still alive. Later, Ingvild found another woman who said, "You're SIV's daughter?" "Yes, SIV is alive. My family has been taking care of her. She's over there," pointing at the base of a solitary tree, where folk had gathered. "Thank you." Ingvild ran to the tree and found a stranger sitting at the base of the tree, leaning on the trunk. On this woman's lap was resting the head of a familiar-looking woman with a bandage-covered face. "Mother!" The bandage-wrapped face tried to turn towards Ingvild, saying in a weak and hesitant voice, "Is that really you, Ingvild?" "Yes." "Oh, Freya, what do they do?" "They blinded me," Saivi said, "with a bronze spike, because I wouldn't heal that troll king. Wouldn't heal him, or couldn't. Wouldn't. I know what is wrong with Njal, and how to heal it, but I would never heal the man who ordered the killing of Maris and Jan. Never." Ingvild, sobbing, crouched by SIV and put a hand on her shoulder. The shoulder felt thin and fragile. Ingvild smelled the reek of infection rising from the bandages on her mother's face. Ingvild changed the bandages over her mother's eyes, seeing the pair of sunken and scabby pits that had once held eyes just like hers. Ingvild arranged for SIV to move into a local farmer's house until other shelter was available. Ingvild guided her sightless mother across a field towards that house. "So hot," SIV muttered. "The whole town is burning, mother. I've never seen so much fire in one place before." SIV said, "A town can be rebuilt. I'm just grateful that Egil and his father's men didn't kill all of the Eid folk before leaving. I've heard a lot of terrible things about that nasty young man. Halfdan rules Eid now, the ruler of a town on fire. Give him my congratulations. The Eid folk deserve my condolences. He's not like King Jal or that Egil person. Halfdan will help these folk to rebuild Eid. He is good at heart, and I care for him." Obviously, at the farmer's house, Ingvild put her mother to bed, pulling the rough blankets over SIV's thin body. "Try to sleep, mother." Ingvild sat by the bed, holding one of SIV's hands. After a while, Ingvild said, "Mother, are you still awake?" "Yes, Ingvild. Do you remember the last thing you said to me before I left you alone? I asked you not to join your fate to Halfdan's." Ingvild whispered, "And you predicted that if I went with him, you would never see me again." "Yes, I remember." Ingvild said, "Now it's happened as you said it would. You will never see me again. If I had listened to you." SIV reached a hand towards the sound of her daughter's voice and touched Ingvild's cheek, her bent, wrinkled fingers stroking the smooth, tear-wet skin of her daughter's face. "Don't blame yourself," SIV said softly. "Nobody can escape their fate." January 4th, year of our Lord 793, to the most venerable pontiff, Alcuin of York, shining lover of Christ. Teta, a humble sinner, sends greetings of enduring affection. I have no words to express my thanks for the abundant affection you have shown in the letter brought by your messenger from beyond the sea. As the Israelites followed the commandments of Moses, so shall I follow your wise advice regarding how to discipline that unruly Leoba. I have disposed with her, as you suggested, in a small separate building which will provide her with complete solitude and darkness. And in that cell shall she remain, pondering on her errors, until her complete submission. She shall speak to no one, and no one shall speak to her. She shall be seen by no one, and shall see no one. Her eyes shall forget the light of sun, until she opens them to radiant truth. We shall only open her cell's door when we hear her call out through the walls, in a sincere tone of voice, her repentance and request to submit to my authority. The only exception to the strict terms of her excommunication shall be Bishop Higbold's annual inspection, when, according to the ancient custom here, he insists on interviewing each and every person at the convent. I am sure that he will insist on speaking to Leoba too, and I have not the authority to refuse. Dearest Alcuin, I regret to write that your promised shipment of olive oil for our masses and hunting falcons for the king has not yet arrived. I will continue to wait, in the hope that your generous gifts were not tragically intercepted, but merely delayed by some incident of sea travel. My best beloved, please pray for me. Let your prayers guide the frail and lost vessel of my soul, exhausted by the tempests of this unjust world, into safe harbor. I eagerly beg, dearest confidant, to be sheltered by your prayers from the poisonous darts of the treacherous enemy of souls. Remember in your inspired prayers the friendship you promised me so long ago in York, a promise you have kept to date to your eternal credit. If it is not itself sinful to remember a past sin with nostalgia, then let us not, now in the winter of our lives, regret anything about that time in York, not even the mistakes we made in that spring garden. So long ago, my Alcuin, so long ago, may I confess to you the deepest hidden yearning of my heart? I fear your disapproval of worldly sentiment, but I must share with you a secret wish, known to none but our Father. After our passings, I wish for you and I to be buried in the same grave. I confess, to my fear of your refusal, that I yearn for our remains to become dust together, blended by the labors of blind worms, sleeping side by side under a single scripture, carved stone. O my spirit husband Alcuin, do I dare dream of our spent bodies at rest together, until we wake to trumpet blasts on Judgment Day? End of Part 1.